Tonight, we travel to the wide, slow banks of the Euphrates, to a city that rises from the plain like a thought too immense for its own age. It is the 18th century before the Common Era. The air is warm. The river moves in the darkness with a sound like breathing. Beyond the reeds, beyond the mud brick houses, beyond the fields cut into careful squares by canals and ditches, there stands Babylon, not yet the world empire of later legend, not yet the golden monster of prophecy and poetry, but already something astonishing. A city of walls, shrines, ledgers, laws, workshops, merchants, judges, priests, scribes, and watchful gods. In the imagination of later centuries, Babylon would become a symbol of arrogance, splendor, exile, wisdom, sin, astronomy, tyranny, mathematics, and sacred confusion. Yet in 1800 BC, it was not a symbol. It was a living place. Its streets held dust, animals, arguments, smoke, bread ovens, market cries, and the footsteps of people who did not know they were ancient. They were not primitive shadows waiting for history to begin. They were minds as sharp as ours, as anxious as ours, as ambitious as ours, and in many ways, they had already built a world that feels disturbingly familiar. For when archaeologists opened the earth of southern Mesopotamia, when stratigraphic excavation traced the layers of settlement, fire, rebuilding, and abandonment, Babylon did not appear as a crude beginning. It appeared as a system. Clay tablets, hardened by accident and survival, carried the marks of cuneiform writing, pressed by reeds into wet clay by hands long turned to dust. These tablets spoke of contracts, wages, property, inheritance, temple offerings, court cases, loans, fields, slaves, debts, marriages, adoptions, and royal commands. They revealed a civilization not merely building walls, but organizing reality. The British Museum, the Louvre, the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin, and collections across the world hold fragments of this buried intelligence. Scholars such as Robert Koldewey, who excavated Babylon in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, helped bring the city back into modern sight. Others, reading tablets recovered from Babylon and from neighboring cities, reconstructed the machinery of old Babylonian society through lithic analysis, ceramic study, architectural recording, and the patient reading of thousands upon thousands of clay documents. A city emerged from silence, and the more that city emerged, the stranger it became, because Babylon around 1800 BC should not seem so advanced to the casual mind trained to imagine the past as a ladder, with ignorance at the bottom and ourselves at the top. Yet there, beside the Euphrates, people were calculating interest, measuring land, standardizing legal obligations, diagnosing illnesses, recording astronomical patterns, training scribes in mathematics, administering canals, managing temple economies, and binding the king himself to the idea that justice could be written down, preserved, displayed, and judged. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. The city of Hammurabi, the great lawgiver king, was not made of stone like the monuments of Egypt. It was made largely of mud brick, that humble material of river clay and straw, shaped by hand, dried by the sun, stacked into walls, and returned in time to earth. Babylon was always fighting its own disappearance. Rain softened it. Floods scarred it. Later builders reused it. Empires trampled it. Modern centuries dug into it, argued over it, damaged it, and admired it. Yet its ghost remains powerful. Imagine now the city at night, The sky above Mesopotamia is vast, almost cruelly clear. Stars burn over the flat world. On rooftops, people sleep in the open air when the heat allows it. Somewhere a child coughs. Somewhere a donkey stamps its hoof. A potter's kiln cools in the dark. The smell of river mud mingles with smoke. Bitumen, date syrup, wool, sweat, and cooked grain. In the sacred precinct, lamps flicker before divine images. Priests move quietly through spaces where mortals believed gods could be fed, dressed, praised, angered, and appeased. This was a world in which gods and mortals once walked the earth, not as fantasy to those who lived there, but as the structure of existence itself. The heavens were not empty. The river was not merely water. The king was not merely a ruler. A law was not merely a rule. Everything belonged to a deep order, fragile and contested, written into the sky, embodied in ritual, enforced in courts, and measured in barley, silver, land, and blood. Babylon's greatness did not begin with towers reaching heaven. It began with administration, with memory, with the astonishing decision to press human thought into clay. A man buys a field. A woman adopts a child. A merchant borrows silver. A builder is accused of negligence. A widow fights for her rights. A priest records offerings. A scribe copies an old mathematical problem with elegant care. These are not the thunderous moments that usually dominate ancient history. No army charges. No city burns. No king raises a sword beneath a storm-filled sky. Yet these small records are perhaps more intimate than monuments because they show civilization as it truly works, not only in conquest, but in promises. And promises require witnesses. In Babylon, those witnesses could be men, officials, family members, temple authorities, and gods. A contract was more than a transaction. It was a moral event. To break an agreement was to disturb not only society, but the cosmic balance. The clay tablet, sealed and stored, became a weapon against forgetfulness. It said, "This happened. These people stood here. These goods were exchanged. This field was measured. This debt must be paid. This judgment has been made." In a world without paper archives, without digital storage, without modern courts, Babylon made memory durable. And that is one of the first great shocks of this ancient city. It was not merely large. It was legible. It wanted the world recorded. The Old Babylonian period, especially under Hammurabi, offers us one of the most extraordinary windows into early urban life anywhere on Earth. Radiocarbon dating helps anchor the long human story around it. Stratigraphic excavation places its layers in time. Genomic data from wider ancient Near Eastern studies reminds us that these were real populations moving, mixing, inheriting, adapting, and surviving. But clay tablets give us something different. They do not merely show that people existed. They allow us to hear the shape of their concerns. What did they fear? Debt, hunger, betrayal, illness, divine anger, bad harvests, corrupt judgment, loss of children, loss of land, loss of name. What did they value? Order, family, property, skill, reputation, divine favor, fair dealing, correct ritual, accurate measurement, written proof. In this way, Babylon becomes not a dead ruin, but a mirror, a dangerous mirror, perhaps, because it reveals that complexity is not modern, bureaucracy is not modern, anxiety is not modern, Ambition is not modern. The desire to build something lasting in a world that dissolves everything, that too is not modern. The city stood in a landscape that demanded intelligence. Southern Mesopotamia did not simply give civilization as a gift. It had to be negotiated with. The Euphrates could nourish or destroy. Canals could feed fields or choke them with salt. Silt could enrich land or block watercourses. Drought could sharpen rivalries. Abundance could invite invasion. Every harvest was a triumph of coordination, and every failure threatened the social order. So Babylon learned to count. It counted grain, labor, days, fields, bricks, animals, silver, offerings, witnesses, penalties, stars, and years. Counting became power. Measurement became governance. Writing became authority. And somewhere in the middle of it all stood the king, presenting himself not merely as a conqueror, but as the one chosen to establish justice, protect the weak, and make the land secure. Of course, the reality was never so pure. Power rarely is. Behind the language of justice lay hierarchy, punishment, forced labor, slavery, gendered inequality, and violence. Babylon was brilliant, but not gentle. Its laws could be severe. Its social ranks were carefully distinguished. Its order had teeth. Yet this is precisely why it matters. The city was advanced not because it was morally perfect, but because it had already begun wrestling with the same terrible question that haunts every civilization. How can human beings live together without tearing each other apart? Babylon answered with gods, kings, laws, canals, tablets, walls, and calculation. It answered with beauty and fear. It answered with punishment and protection. It answered with ceremony and accounting. And across nearly 4,000 years, that answer still reaches us, incomplete, damaged, answerless, adrift to ponder. The ruins do not speak easily. The Euphrates has shifted. The walls have fallen. The mud brick has melted back into the plain. Many tablets remain unread. Many archives are lost forever. Many names have vanished beyond recovery. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made. But tonight, as the lamps of Babylon tremble in the ancient dark, we begin with one simple recognition. This city was not waiting for history. It was already making it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the night gathers around us, tell me where in the world you are listening from, and what time it is where you are. The river did not merely pass Babylon. It made Babylon think. Across the southern Mesopotamian plain, the Euphrates moved with an authority older than kings. It came down from distant highlands, carrying water, silt, memory, and danger. To the people who lived along its banks, the river was not a blue line on a map, not an ornament in the background of empire, but the living spine of the world. It could fatten the fields, break the banks, drown the low places, abandon old channels, carve new paths, and leave entire communities staring across cracked mud at a horizon where water had failed to arrive. Babylon rose in a land that demanded cooperation. There were no great forests nearby to hide inside, no reliable summer rains to trust with seed and prayer, no gentle landscape that simply opened its hands and fed those who settled there. The city belonged to the alluvial plain, a wide, low, shimmering world of clay. Reeds, dust, insects, birds, and heat, where survival depended on directing water with discipline. The Euphrates gave life, but only to those who could persuade it. So men walked the canal banks with tools on their shoulders. Workers cut channels through clay. Others cleared silt from ditches, repaired embankments, strengthened levees, and watched for breaches where water might escape with terrifying speed. Irrigation was not a single achievement completed by some forgotten ancestor. It was a burden renewed every season. A canal neglected for too long could choke. A field watered poorly could turn bitter with salt. A levee left weak could collapse under flood pressure and drag months of labor into ruin. This was the foundation of Babylonian power. Not the palace first, not the temple first, water first. The city's sophistication grew from the need to manage a difficult landscape. The plowman, the canal worker, the surveyor, the scribe, the temple official, the royal administrator, and the judge were all tied together by water. A field was not simply land. It was measured land, taxable land, inheritable land, disputable land, irrigated land. Its value depended on access to canals and on the labor needed to keep those canals alive. In this way, geography became bureaucracy. The plain trained the Babylonians to record. A farmer might know the bend of a ditch by memory, but a city could not run on memory alone. Boundaries had to be described. Deliveries had to be counted. Labor obligations had to be assigned. Disputes had to be judged. If one man's field received water before another's, if a canal failed, if flood damage ruined crops, if a neighbor diverted flow unfairly, then speech alone was not enough. There had to be witnesses. There had to be tablets. There had to be authority. The river turned clay into civilization twice. First, it laid down the earth from which bricks could be shaped, walls raised, tablets formed, and hearths built. Then, through irrigation, it fed the grain that supported specialists, scribes, builders, merchants, priests, and kings. The same mud that clung to a laborer's ankles could become the wall of a house, the surface of a contract, the foundation of a temple, or the sealed record of a court judgment. In Babylon, matter and memory came from the same wet ground. Stand at dawn beside an irrigation canal and imagine the city waking. Mist lies low over the water. Reeds whisper along the edge. Men lead oxen toward fields divided into long strips. Women carry vessels. Children move sleepily near doorways. Birds rise suddenly from the marshier places. The smell is sharp and fertile. Mud mixed with dung, smoke, and green growth. In the distance, mud brick buildings catch the first light, their surfaces the color of baked bread. The city seems still, but already it depends on countless acts of maintenance. Someone must decide who cleans which canal. Someone must measure the expected harvest. Someone must record the rent owed from a field. Someone must store barley against hunger. Someone must send laborers when the embankment weakens. Someone must settle disputes when men accuse one another of stealing water or neglecting duty. Babylon's greatness was born in this practical world. The ancient city was not advanced because it escaped nature. It was advanced because it never could. Its brilliance lay in adaptation, in the creation of institutions strong enough to face a river that could not be commanded by faith alone. Still, the Euphrates was more than a machine of irrigation. It was a road, by water. Goods could move farther and more heavily than by donkey over dust. Boats carried grain, wool, timber from distant regions, stone not found in the alluvial south, metals from beyond the plain, jars, reeds, textiles, and people. Along the river and its connected channels, Babylon touched other cities, other markets, other ambitions. The river made the city fertile, but it also made it connected. Wealth flowed not only from fields, but from movement. A merchant watching bales unloaded from a boat would have understood this deeply. The river brought news. It brought strangers. It brought risk. It carried rumors of kings, wars, prices, failed harvests, and distant opportunities. It linked households to markets and temples to suppliers. It allowed Babylon to become not only a place of production, but a place of exchange. And exchange requires trust. A boatman promises delivery. A merchant advances silver. A temple expects grain. A landholder leases a field. A family borrows during hardship and hopes the harvest will repay the debt. Everywhere the river carried goods. Writing followed close behind. The wet clay tablet became the dry witness of moving wealth. Yet the same water that made Babylon rich carried the seeds of anxiety. Irrigation in southern Mesopotamia could raise salts from the soil. Over time, fields could lose strength. Barley tolerated difficult soil better than some crops. But even barley had limits. The more people depended on canals, the more canal failure became a political danger. Water management was therefore not simply agricultural, it was social control. A king who maintained canals could present himself as guardian of abundance. A ruler who failed might face hunger, anger, migration, and rebellion. For this reason, inscriptions and royal claims often celebrated canal work with almost sacred intensity. To open a canal was to do more than improve farming. It was to restore order to the land. It was to make fields drink again. It was to show the gods, the people, and rival cities that the king could transform chaos into nourishment. Babylon stood where that promise mattered. The city's mud brick walls, busy gates, storehouses, shrines, workshops, and courts were all dependent on the watery grammar of the plain. Without canals, no grain surplus. Without grain surplus, no full-time scribes in training. Without scribes, no vast legal and administrative memory. Without stored food, no stable labor for public works. Without public works, no confidence in royal power. The system was circular, delicate, and immense. This is why the landscape itself must be understood as one of Babylon's architects. Not a silent background, an active force. The river shaped law because it created disputes. It shaped mathematics because fields had to be measured. It shaped kingship because waterworks required command. It shaped religion because floods, droughts, and harvests seemed inseparable from divine mood. It shaped economy because grain, silver, rent, and labor all moved through the logic of irrigation. It shaped time because the agricultural year gave rhythm to obligation, hope, and fear. In the afternoon heat, the canals would gleam like dull bronze. The air would tremble above the fields. Workers would move slowly, skin shining with sweat, their feet sinking into the softened banks. In the city, scribes might sit in shaded rooms, recording the obligations that such labor created. The sound of reed stylus on clay was quiet, but behind it stood the roar of the entire landscape. Babylon was advanced because it had learned that civilization is maintenance, not merely invention, not merely conquest, not merely monuments raised against the sky. Maintenance, the repeated, exhausting, intelligent defense of order against entropy. A canal cleared, a wall repaired, a boundary checked, a record stored, a debt acknowledged, a harvest measured, a gate watched, a god honored, a judgment enforced. Every ancient city had dreams, but Babylon had systems. Still, the systems were never safe forever. The river could shift, the soil could tire, labor could fail, officials could cheat, kings could overreach, Neighboring powers could covet the wealth that water made possible. The very success of Babylon made it visible, and visibility in the ancient world was a form of danger. So the Euphrates gave Babylon life, and with life, vulnerability. In the dark, when the fields cooled and the water moved unseen beyond the city, one might have heard frogs calling from the reeds, insects singing, dogs barking in distant courtyards, and the murmur of people settling into sleep. Above them all, the stars watched the plain. Beneath them, canals carried moonlight through the engineered earth. The river was still moving, still giving, still threatening, still shaping the fate of a city that seemed, even then, too complex to have risen from mud. But it did rise, from silt and calculation, from flood and labor, from the patient struggle to make water obey just long enough for human life to flourish. For centuries, Babylon lay beneath the earth like a sleeping name. Travelers crossed the Mesopotamian plain and saw mounds where cities had been. Wind moved across them. Grass grew thinly in the hard seasons. Brick fragments surfaced after rain. Sometimes a seal, a shard, a broken inscription, or a piece of glazed color appeared in the soil like a message pushed upward from a drowned world. Yet the full city remained hidden, not as a single buried palace waiting to be uncovered, but as a vast confusion of ruined walls, eroded platforms, collapsed rooms, filled streets, sacred spaces, and later disturbances. Babylon did not vanish cleanly. It dissolved. Mud brick returned to mud. Towers slumped into shapeless elevations. Houses folded inward. Floors vanished beneath debris. Later generations dug into earlier ones. Bricks were removed, reused, carried away, and built into other structures. Flooding, weather, war, neglect, and human hunger for building material all helped unmake the ancient city. By the time modern archaeology turned its eyes seriously toward the site, Babylon was not standing like a complete monument. It was scattered, wounded, and deeply entangled with its own long life. This is the first difficulty in recovering Babylon. The city was not one moment, it was many Babylons, piled upon one another. To excavate such a place is to read time in layers. Stratigraphic excavation does not treat the earth as empty dirt, but as a record. A floor belongs to a room belongs to a building belongs to a phase belongs to a period of use, rebuilding, destruction, repair, or abandonment. The archaeologist must move slowly, noticing changes in soil texture, brick type, ash, pottery, seal impressions, wall alignments, drains, graves, pits, and surfaces hardened by feet that crossed them thousands of years ago. A careless spade can destroy a century. A patient trowel can recover a morning. The rediscovery of Babylon became one of the great dramas of Near Eastern archaeology. In the late 19th century, European museums and scholarly institutions looked toward Mesopotamia with increasing hunger. Assyria had already astonished the world with palace reliefs, winged figures, royal inscriptions, and libraries of clay tablets. The public imagination was awake. Biblical lands, imperial ruins, and ancient scripts formed a powerful mixture of scholarship, ambition, rivalry, and spectacle. Then came Robert Koldewey, the German architect and archaeologist whose name remains inseparable from Babylon. Beginning in 1899, he directed major excavations at the site with a level of architectural attention that changed how the city could be understood. He was not merely searching for objects. He was tracing buildings. Walls mattered to him. Brickwork mattered. Street plans mattered. Foundations mattered. The shape of the city itself became evidence. Under the dust, teams exposed portions of processional ways, palace structures, gateways, temples, and defensive works from later Babylonian periods. The most famous discoveries belonged not to the age of Hammurabi, but to the Neo-Babylonian city of Nebuchadnezzar II, with its glazed brick splendor and monumental vision. Yet even those later remains helped prove that Babylon was not just a story told by enemies or admirers. It had mass. It had architecture. It had engineering. It had color. It had scale. The earth was admitting that legend had a body. Still, the older Babylon of 1800 BC was harder to seize. Mud brick cities are treacherous archives. Their oldest layers are often buried beneath later rebuilding, damaged by water, cut by foundations, or difficult to distinguish without careful analysis. The city of Hammurabi did not leave behind the same visually overwhelming remains as later imperial Babylon. Its survival rests more quietly in tablets, seals, legal records, administrative texts, fragments of architecture, pottery sequences, and comparison with better preserved Old Babylonian sites across the region. This is where the science becomes as dramatic as any battle. Ceramic typology allows archaeologists to compare shapes, fabrics, firing techniques, and decoration across sites and periods. Lithic analysis, though more commonly associated with stone tools and earlier ages, helps reconstruct technological habits and material choices where stone objects appear in a land poor in native stone. Radiocarbon dating offers chronological anchors where organic remains survive. Soil analysis can reveal flooding, burning, occupation surfaces, and environmental stress. Architectural recording shows how rooms were arranged, how walls were repaired, how space was controlled, and how buildings changed through time. And then there are the tablets. Clay is fragile when wet, ordinary when shaped, and almost immortal when fired or hardened by accident. The scribes of Mesopotamia did not intend every tablet to survive for 4,000 years. Many were practical documents, the paperwork of a living society, yet fire, burial, and the chemistry of survival gave modern scholars an accidental archive of astonishing richness. A clay tablet may be small enough to rest in the palm, but it can carry an entire human drama. A debt unpaid, a field disputed, a slave sold, a daughter married, a house rented, a verdict delivered, a shipment recorded, a god invoked, a mathematical exercise copied by a student whose hand hesitated, pressed too deeply, corrected itself, and moved on. To read cuneiform is to cross a distance that feels almost forbidden. The marks are not letters in the modern alphabet. They are wedge-shaped impressions made by a reed stylus, arranged according to systems of signs with long histories behind them. The script could record several languages across Mesopotamian civilization, and by the Old Babylonian period, it carried legal, administrative, literary, religious, and scholarly thought with immense flexibility. The decipherment of cuneiform in the 19th century opened a locked chamber in human history. Before that, Babylon was known through fragments of classical writing, religious tradition, and ruins dimly understood. After decipherment, Babylon began speaking in its own bureaucratic, poetic, legal, fearful, practical, and learned voices. Not one voice, thousands. This is perhaps the most humbling part of the rediscovery. The city is not reconstructed from a single royal boast. It is reconstructed from countless ordinary records that make its reality denser than myth. The king matters, certainly, Palaces and temples matter, but so do house deeds, court transcripts, school tablets, lists of goods, and private letters. Through them, Babylon becomes not only a capital, but a society. Imagine an excavation room where newly recovered tablets are cleaned and examined. Dust clings to the edges. Some are cracked. Some are sealed. Some still bear the impressions of cylinder seals rolled over wet clay long ago. Miniature worlds of gods, worshippers, symbols, animals, and authority. A specialist studies the surface under light, turning the object gently, searching for signs. Every wedge is a decision made by a hand that once belonged to a breathing person. Outside, the mound may seem silent. Inside the tablet, argument continues. This is the paradox of Babylon's discovery. The grand ruins are broken, yet the administrative mind survives. Mud brick walls melted, but legal formulas endured. Roofs fell, but contracts remained legible. Streets disappeared, but the record of a sale could still be read. The city lost its skyline, but not all of its memory. Museums now hold many fragments of Babylon's ancient intelligence. Some were excavated carefully. Others entered collections through older systems of removal and trade that modern archaeology regards with far greater caution. The story of discovery is therefore not pure triumph. It is also a story of imperial appetite, damaged contexts, removed heritage, and questions that cannot be answered because objects were taken from the ground without proper record. Context is everything. A tablet without context still speaks, but it speaks with part of its world missing. A pot without its layer, a seal without its room, a brick without its wall, a grave without its precise position. All lose some of their power. Archaeology is not treasure hunting. It is relationship hunting. It asks where things were, what surrounded them, how they lay, what came above them, what came below them, and what human action placed them there. Babylon's buried giant has therefore been awakened unevenly. Some parts are brilliantly known, others remain obscure. The later city, with its famous monumental remains, often dominates the imagination. The earlier city, the Babylon of Hammurabi's century, must be approached through a wider web of evidence, with patience and restraint. The temptation is always to build too much from too little, to let legend fill the gaps where excavation has not yet spoken. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. Beneath the plain, beneath disturbed layers and vanished rooms, beneath the scars left by time and modern history, there may still be archives unopened, surfaces unrecognized, foundations waiting in darkness. Future discoveries may refine the map, alter the chronology, challenge old assumptions, or uncover lives currently lost beyond naming. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made. And yet, enough has emerged to change the way Babylon must be imagined. Not as a fantasy city of impossible towers alone, not as a biblical warning alone, not as a symbol of arrogance alone, but as a real urban organism, built of clay, calculation, hierarchy, devotion, labor, and memory. A place whose people left behind not only monuments to power, but records of living complexity. A city dug from the earth one wall, one shard, one tablet, one line, one silence at a time. In the fading light, the mound appears almost ordinary. The wind crosses it. The dust lifts. A broken brick lies half exposed, and beneath that stillness, Babylon waits. Not dead, but unfinished in our understanding, its ancient mind surfacing slowly through the patient hands of those willing to listen to the ground. In the city of Babylon, power did not only wear a crown, it spoke in law. Around 1800 BC, the name of Hammurabi begins to rise from the clay record with a weight that few ancient rulers would ever equal. He was king of Babylon, but he was not born into mastery over all Mesopotamia. His world was crowded with rival kingdoms, old cities, proud dynasties, shifting alliances, dangerous neighbors, and gods whose favor had to be claimed carefully. Babylon was not yet inevitable. It had to be made important. It had to be defended, expanded, administered, and imagined into greatness. Hammurabi understood that conquest alone was not enough. A city could seize fields and towns, but if it could not govern them, victory would decay. Soldiers might open the road to power, but scribes, judges, canal workers, temple officials, tax collectors, governors, and messengers kept that road from collapsing. In this world, the king's authority had to move farther than his own voice. It had to travel through written orders, legal judgments, public rituals, and a shared belief that royal power was not merely force, but order made visible. This is why Hammurabi's Babylon feels so startling. It was a city of command, but also of definition. Who owned a field? Who owed silver? Who could inherit? Who was responsible when a house collapsed? Who was liable when an ox gored a man? Who paid for medical treatment? Who was punished for false accusation? Who protected the widow, the orphan, the debtor, the merchant, the son, the wife, the slave, the soldier, the tenant farmer? To modern ears, these questions sound administrative, almost dry. But in ancient Babylon, they were life and death. Land was survival. Debt could swallow a household. Marriage joined families, property, labor, and status. Adoption could preserve a name. A court judgment could protect the vulnerable or ruin the accused. A written law could stand between a person and the appetite of the powerful, at least in theory. Here lies the strange brilliance of Hammurabi's city. It knew that society was fragile. It knew that men lied, builders cut corners, merchants cheated, witnesses vanished, judges could be bribed, sons could rebel, husbands could abandon, fields could be stolen, debtors could be crushed, accusations could be weaponized, violence could spill from house to house until the whole community trembled. So Babylon answered with formulas, penalties, ranks, procedures, oaths, witnesses, and written memory. The famous law collection associated with Hammurabi was not the first law in human history, nor was it a modern legal code in the full sense. It did not function exactly like contemporary statute books. Yet it remains one of the most extraordinary monuments of ancient thought because it presents kingship as a moral architecture. The ruler is not shown merely as the strongest man. He is presented as the shepherd of justice, the one appointed to establish right order, restrain the wicked, protect the weak, and cause the land to shine. That phrase, to cause the land to shine, belongs to the emotional world of kingship. Order was imagined as brightness. Injustice was a kind of darkness. The king, standing between heaven and earth, claimed to bring light into human affairs. Picture the stone monument upon which Hammurabi's laws were inscribed. At the top, the king stands before the enthroned sun god of justice. The scene is not decoration. It is political theology. The law does not appear as Hammurabi's personal invention, whispered from his own ambition. It is framed as something received under divine authority, something rooted in the structure of the cosmos. The king is powerful because the gods have made him responsible. In Babylon, Government was sacred performance and practical administration at the same time. A man entering a court did not step into a secular room as modern people might imagine it. He entered a world where oaths before gods mattered, where written tablets preserved claims, where witnesses could be summoned, where penalties reflected status, and where truth was not merely discovered, but ritually demanded. The legal process could be harsh, it could be unequal, it could be frightening. But it also reveals a society intensely concerned with procedure. Procedure is civilization's attempt to slow down violence. Instead of immediate revenge, there is a hearing. Instead of rumor, testimony. Instead of memory alone, a tablet. Instead of private strength, public judgment. The laws attributed to Hammurabi draw a world of ranked humanity. There were free persons of higher status, common dependents, slaves, men, women, children, professionals, laborers, merchants, soldiers, priests, and officials. Punishment did not fall equally on all bodies. Status mattered, gender mattered, wealth mattered. This was not a modern dream of universal equality. It was a controlled hierarchy, and the law often defended that hierarchy with severity. Yet it would be a mistake to see only cruelty. There is also anxiety about abuse. The collection speaks again and again to responsibility. A builder whose house collapses cannot simply shrug. A farmer who neglects a dike may owe compensation if flooding ruins his neighbor's crop. A merchant entrusting goods to an agent needs proof. A judge who changes a verdict after giving it faces disgrace and removal. A false accuser may suffer the penalty intended for the accused. This is law as a net thrown over chaos. Some of its knots are brutal. Some are protective. All reveal a society deeply aware that complexity requires restraint. Hammurabi's city was not governed from the palace alone. Authority spread through many hands. Scribes trained to master difficult signs and legal formulas. Judges heard disputes. Elders and local notables played roles in community affairs. Temple institutions held land, wealth, and personnel. Soldiers received support tied to service. Merchants carried goods and risk across dangerous distances. Families managed property through contracts that could bind the living and remember the dead. The king stood above this world, but he depended on it. No ruler, however mighty in inscription, could personally watch every canal, field, gateway, market, workshop, household, and courtroom. Hammurabi's achievement lay in making royal authority reproducible, a judgment written in standard language, an order sealed and delivered, a law proclaimed in stone, a canal project recorded, a conquered city folded into administration. All these allowed Babylonian power to outlive the king's physical presence. In the royal imagination, Hammurabi was a shepherd. The image is gentle at first. A shepherd guides, protects, nourishes, watches. But a shepherd also owns the flock, counts it, controls its breeding, chooses where it moves, and cuts away what threatens order. Ancient kings loved the image because it softened domination without denying authority. To call the people a flock was to promise care, but also to claim the right to direct their lives. This is the difficult beauty of old Babylonian kingship. It could speak of justice while enforcing inequality. It could protect the widow while preserving patriarchy. It could punish corruption while extracting labor. It could build canals that fed thousands while demanding obedience from those who dug them. It could call itself light while casting long shadows. The city around Hammurabi would have pulsed with this tension. In the palace, messengers came and went. In scribal rooms, tablets were shaped, inscribed, dried, stored, and retrieved. In court spaces, men argued over land boundaries, dowries, damaged goods, unpaid loans, and broken promises. At city gates, officials witnessed transactions. In temples, priests maintained divine favor because no law, however carefully written, could stand apart from the gods. The people of Babylon did not live beneath abstraction. They lived under decisions. A widow may have pressed her seal into clay with trembling hope. A debtor may have listened in fear as terms were read aloud. A builder may have measured timber more carefully because the law remembered collapsed houses. A merchant may have slept easier, knowing his agreement had witnesses. A judge may have felt the weight of royal order when giving a verdict. A scribe may have copied legal phrases until authority settled into his hands as habit. This is how a city becomes advanced, not by becoming kind, not by becoming free in the modern sense, but by recognizing that power must be organized, disputes must be recorded, obligations must be defined, and memory must be made stronger than denial. Hammurabi's Babylon was a machine of order built inside a world of uncertainty. Its laws did not eliminate suffering. They did not erase violence. They did not make every person equal beneath the sun. But they show a civilization thinking intensely about responsibility. The code stands like a dark, polished mirror in which humanity can still see itself. Proud, fearful, brilliant, severe, longing for justice, and never fully able to escape domination. At night, when the courts fell silent and the scribes set down their reeds, the law did not sleep. It remained in tablets stored in houses and temples. It remained in oaths spoken under divine names. It remained in the reputation of judges. It remained in fear of penalty. It remained in the king's claim that his city stood not merely on mud brick and canals, but on justice. Somewhere in Babylon, beneath the stars, a man wronged by another may have believed that order could be restored. Somewhere else, a poorer man may have known that order favored those above him. Both truths belonged to the city. Both were written into its brilliance. Hammurabi's Babylon was not a simple monument to law. It was a civilization asking a terrifying question in public. Can justice survive when power writes the rules? The clay does not answer completely. The stone does not comfort us. Still, the question remains. Sharp as a reed stylus pressed into wet earth, preserved across the long dark, waiting for every later city to face it again. In Babylon, the mind learned to leave footprints, not in sand, where wind could erase them, not in water, where the river would swallow them, but in clay. The clay tablet was small, humble, and astonishing. It did not gleam like gold. It did not tower above the plain. It did not announce itself with the arrogance of a palace wall. It sat in the hand, damp at first, heavy with possibility, waiting for the sharp end of a reed. Then the scribe pressed signs into it, one careful wedge at a time, and human thought became a thing that could be carried, sealed, stored, copied, disputed, forgotten, rediscovered, and read by eyes born nearly 4,000 years too late. This was one of Babylon's greatest technologies. Writing did not merely decorate power. It created power. To write was to extend the reach of memory beyond the fragile life of the body. A spoken promise could die with a witness. A remembered number could blur. A boundary could be challenged. A debt could be denied. A royal order could be misreported. But a tablet had weight. It could be brought into court. It could be placed before officials. It could be sealed by parties and witnesses. It could survive fire, neglect, and burial. In a world where truth was often contested, clay gave memory a body. The scribes who mastered this art belonged to one of the most important intellectual classes in the ancient city. Their training was difficult. Their discipline was severe. They learned signs, numbers, formulas, lists, legal phrases, administrative patterns, mathematical procedures, and literary compositions. They copied and recopied, shaping the mind through repetition. Their world was not romantic. It smelled of damp clay, reed, sweat, dust, and concentration. Yet within those rooms, civilization was being programmed. A student would sit before a teacher and struggle with signs that looked simple only to the initiated. The hand had to learn pressure, angle, spacing, rhythm. Too soft, and the sign failed. Too deep, and the clay distorted. Too slow, and the surface dried. The reed stylus became an extension of thought, and thought had to obey a system older than the student, older than his father, older than the city's present ambitions. The first lessons were not grand declarations of kings. They were exercises, lists of signs, lists of professions, lists of trees, animals, stones, metals, cities, gods, objects, and measures. To us, a list may seem dull. To Babylon, a list was a way of ordering the world. The act of classification is never innocent. To name things, arrange them, compare them, and preserve them is to make the world more governable. A scribe trained on lists was not merely memorizing vocabulary. He was entering a universe where everything could be placed, counted, ranked, recorded, and retrieved. This is why clay tablets reveal not only administration, but mentality. Babylon thought through categories. It thought through equivalences. It thought through measures. It thought through cases. If a field has this shape, how is its area found? If a man borrows this amount of silver, what interest is owed? If barley is distributed among workers, what share belongs to each? If a wall requires so many bricks, how much labor must be gathered? If a contract names these witnesses, what obligation has been fixed? The scribe did not float above society as a detached scholar. He sat at the nerve center of practical life. His work touched the market, the court, the temple, the palace, the field, and the household. He recorded the movement of goods. He calculated rations. He drafted sales. He witnessed adoption. He copied judgments. He maintained accounts. He preserved the language through which power recognized people. To be unseen by writing could be dangerous. A person with no recorded claim might lose land. A debt not properly documented could become a weapon. A transaction without witnesses could dissolve into accusation. In Babylon, the tablet did not merely remember society. It helped decide who existed within its official order. Yet the scribal world was not only practical, it was also deeply intellectual. School tablets from the old Babylonian period open a rare window into ancient education. Some show clean model texts written by teachers. Others preserve rougher attempts by learners, with uneven signs and mistakes. These are among the most intimate objects from the ancient Near East. They show not triumph, but effort. A child or young apprentice pressing marks into clay. Perhaps bored, perhaps frightened, perhaps proud, perhaps dreaming of the status that literacy could bring. The classroom was a place of discipline. Ancient school texts sometimes imagine harsh correction, strict teachers, demanding fathers, and anxious students. Whether exaggerated or not, the mood is familiar. Education was an ordeal through which status could be earned. To write was not natural. It was acquired, enforced, and costly. The scribal hand carried social privilege, because most people did not command such training. Babylonian literacy was powerful precisely because it was limited. A farmer might know seasons, soil, animals, and water better than any scribe. A craftsperson might know wood, metal, cloth, leather, clay, or stone by touch and smell. A midwife might know bodies and danger through experience beyond written formulas. But the scribe knew how to make institutions remember. That skill allowed him to move between worlds. He could serve a household, a merchant, a temple, or the palace. He could transform speech into record. He could translate conflict into legal structure. He could convert grain into numbers, labor into rations, land into measurements, and human obligation into durable signs. The city depended on such transformations. In a storehouse, grain was not only grain, it became an entry. In a loan, silver was not only silver, it became principal, interest, term, and witness. In a marriage, two lives were not only joined, property, promises, dowry, inheritance, and family alliances were fixed. In a court, anger was not only anger, it became accusation, testimony, oath, judgment, and penalty. This is the bureaucratic miracle of Babylon. It did not make human life simpler. In many ways, it made life more complex, but it allowed complexity to be managed at scale. The city could grow because memory grew with it. Institutions could persist because records outlived voices. Authority could travel because writing could move where the king was absent. A sealed tablet was a portable fragment of order. The seal itself deserves attention. Cylinder seals, rolled across wet clay, carried miniature images of astonishing delicacy. Gods, worshippers, animals, symbols, and ritual scenes appeared in compressed form. The seal was identity, authority, and beauty combined. It marked a document not as anonymous clay, but as belonging to a person or office. To press a seal was to say, I stand behind this. I am bound to this. I have been seen here. Imagine a merchant preparing a contract. The tablet is shaped. The terms are dictated. The scribe writes. Witnesses gather. Names are recorded. The clay is still soft. A seal is rolled across it, leaving an image that curls around the surface like a memory made visible. Then the tablet dries. The moment hardens. What was spoken in the heat of a single day becomes evidence for years. This was not a primitive act. It was a sophisticated legal technology. Babylonian scribes also preserved mathematical texts that reveal startling levels of abstraction. Problems concerning fields, volumes, reciprocals, and equations were copied not merely for immediate accounting, but as training in structured thought. The base 60 numerical system allowed flexible calculation and left a legacy still felt whenever modern people divide an hour into 60 minutes or a circle into 360 degrees. The roots of that intellectual habit reach deep into Mesopotamian practices of number, measure, and sky watching. But mathematics in Babylon was not separate from clay. A problem lived as signs. A solution unfolded through notation. A student learned by copying procedures, internalizing patterns, and making numbers behave under the eye of tradition. In such tablets, we do not see science in the modern laboratory sense, yet we see disciplined reasoning. We see people capable of abstraction, comparison, approximation, and formal method. They were not waiting for rational thought to be invented. They were already using it. Still, Babylonian writing did not banish mystery. The same scribal culture that recorded loans and geometry also copied omens, incantations, hymns, myths, rituals, and observations of strange events. This was not contradiction to the Babylonian mind. The world was layered. A liver examined by a diviner, a star appearing at a certain time, a malformed birth, an eclipse, a fever, a dream, a political disaster. All could be signs within a meaningful cosmos. The scribe's task was not to divide the practical from the sacred, as modern categories might demand. His task was to preserve knowledge that helped humans survive among powers visible and invisible. Clay could hold a debt. Clay could hold a prayer. Clay could hold a calculation. Clay could hold dread. This breadth is what makes Babylon so advanced and so alien at once. Its scribes stood at the crossing of accounting and astrology, law and lamentation, measurement and myth. They did not see themselves as narrow technicians. They were custodians of ordered knowledge in a universe that constantly threatened disorder. The tablet, then, was not merely an object, it was a battlefield against forgetting. Human life disappears quickly. A voice vanishes at once. A face lasts only while someone remembers it. A house falls. A body is buried. A family line may end. A city itself may sink into the earth. But a tablet, hardened and left in darkness, can wait with terrifying patience. It can carry a name beyond empire. It can preserve a lawsuit longer than a kingdom. It can make a schoolchild's mistake more durable than a palace banquet. This is why the archives of Babylon and its world are so haunting. They do not only give historians information, they give scale to human persistence. Each tablet says that someone needed the future to know something, even if that future was only the next harvest, the next court date, the next payment, the next generation. The scribes did not imagine us. They wrote for their own world, yet their clay has reached ours. And in that crossing, Babylon becomes intimate. The city of walls and temples turns suddenly into a place of hands. Hands kneading clay, hands cutting reeds, hands sealing documents, hands counting grain, hands correcting students, hands lifting tablets onto shelves, hands breaking old records when they were no longer needed, hands pressing signs with enough care that the dead can still be read. At dusk, a scribe may have washed the clay from his fingers and stepped out into the street. The air would have cooled. Smoke would rise from houses. Animals would be driven inward. The river would darken. Somewhere, a tablet he had written that day would dry in silence, unnoticed by most, yet stronger than memory. Babylon's walls would fall. Its kings would die. Its canals would change. Its gods would lose their temples. But the tablets would remain, sleeping in the earth, carrying the living minds of a vanished city into the long patience of time. Above Babylon, the night sky was not empty darkness. It was a written surface. The stars did not merely glitter. They arranged themselves into signs, patterns, returns, warnings, and measures. The moon changed its shape with solemn regularity. Planets moved like wandering fires against the fixed glitter of the heavens. Eclipses disturbed the world with sudden dread. Dawn returned, month followed month, and the sky seemed to reveal a vast order, distant yet intimate, terrifying yet dependable. The Babylonians looked upward and counted. This was one of the great intellectual acts of the ancient world. In the city's scribal culture, number was not simply a tool for merchants and surveyors. Number was a bridge between earth and heaven. The same habits of calculation used to divide fields, distribute grain, measure bricks, and compute interest could also be directed toward celestial motion. The result was not modern astronomy as we understand it, but it was a disciplined, cumulative, and mathematically rich tradition of watching the sky with astonishing seriousness. At the center of this tradition stood the base 60 system. To modern listeners, 10 feels natural because fingers have trained us to think in tens. But Babylonian calculation developed through a sexagesimal structure, a system based on 60. 60 is a generous number. It divides cleanly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This made it wonderfully useful for fractions, measures, time, geometry, and astronomical computation. Its inheritance still lies hidden in the modern world. An hour has 60 minutes. A minute has 60 seconds. A circle is divided into 360 degrees. The ghost of Babylon sits quietly on every clock face. This is not a small legacy. It means that the ancient city helped shape the way humanity still measures duration and space. Every turning hand on a clock, every navigational bearing, every geometric angle carries a distant echo of Mesopotamian number. Yet this mathematical culture did not arise from abstraction alone. It was grounded in the needs of an organized society. Fields had to be measured even when they were irregular. Labor had to be counted. Rations had to be divided. Construction required volume, area, and proportion. Trade required conversion between units. Loans demanded interest calculations. Tax and tribute required consistency. A city cannot become administratively complex without making number reliable. Babylonian scribes were trained through problems. Some tablets preserved exercises that appear almost like puzzles. A field has a certain length and width. A quantity is divided among workers. A reciprocal must be found. A square root is approximated. A volume is calculated. A problem is stated. A method is followed. And a result is reached. There is a calm precision in these texts, a sense that numbers can be disciplined if the mind is trained to move through them step by step. This is one of the most powerful corrections to the old myth that ancient people lived in a fog of superstition. Babylonian thought was not simple. It could be symbolic, ritual, sacred, and omen-filled, yet also exacting, procedural, numerical, and analytical. The same civilization that searched the liver of a sacrificed animal for divine messages could calculate with sophistication. The same scribal class that recorded omens could handle geometry. To separate these worlds too sharply is to misunderstand the ancient mind. For Babylon, heaven, number, law, and order were not enemies. They were interwoven. The sky itself encouraged record-keeping. A single observation means little. A crescent moon appears. A planet rises. A star vanishes in the brightness of dawn. A strange eclipse darkens the world. But when generations of observers record appearances and intervals, the heavens begin to reveal rhythm. Patterns emerge from repetition. The scribal archive becomes a memory larger than any one life. A priest-scholar may look at a tablet copied from an older tablet, itself copied from an older tradition, and stand inside accumulated time. This was the genius of Babylonian astronomy. It made patience into knowledge. Imagine the roof of a temple or a high place in the city during the cool hours before dawn. The streets below are quiet. Dogs move through shadows. A distant oven sends a thin smell of smoke into the air. The river cannot be seen, but its presence is felt in the dampness of the night. Above, the sky stretches immense and black. A trained observer watches the horizon, waiting for a star or planet to appear at the expected moment. The act is both scientific and sacred. The observer is not merely curious. He is responsible. Celestial events may concern the king, the land, the harvest, war, disease, prosperity, or danger. If the heavens speak, then their speech must be recorded accurately. A mistake is not just an intellectual failure. It may be a political and religious failure. The sky is too important to be observed carelessly. This pressure helped make Babylonian scholarship rigorous. The heavens required careful timing. The calendar required adjustment. Months followed the moon. But the year had to remain in conversation with the seasons. Agricultural, ritual, and civic life depended on correct reckoning. Festivals had to occur at proper times. Offerings had to be made according to rhythm. The city's sacred and practical life both depended on temporal order. Time itself became an object of administration. A day could be divided. A month could be named. A year could be counted by the reign of a king. Celestial cycles could be linked to omens. The movement of heavenly bodies could be watched for significance. In such a world, astronomy was not a hobby. It was a state concern, a temple concern, a cosmic concern. The moon was especially powerful. Its phases governed the month. Its disappearance and return shaped ritual imagination, and its eclipses could provoke fear. An eclipse was not merely a shadow crossing a body in space. To those who watched from Babylon, it could mean danger to the king or disruption in the land. Ritual specialists might respond with protective ceremonies, substitutions, prayers, and careful interpretation. The event was physical, visible, undeniable, yet its meaning belonged to a universe thick with divine intention. The planets also mattered. Their movements were stranger than those of fixed stars. They wandered, slowed, reversed, brightened, and vanished. To the Babylonian scholar, this wandering was not chaos. It was a pattern awaiting mastery. Over long periods, observations of planetary motion became increasingly systematic. Later, Babylonian astronomy would develop methods of remarkable sophistication, but its roots lay in the same intellectual soil of scribal discipline, numerical habit, and celestial attention. What makes Babylon so advanced is not that it thought exactly as modern science thinks. It did not. Its sky was alive with meaning. Its mathematics served ritual as well as administration. Its predictions were entangled with omens. Its scholars did not gaze into a silent universe of matter only. They looked into a charged heaven where gods, kings, and cities were bound together. Yet from within that sacred universe, they achieved something enduring. They proved that regularity could be found through record. They showed that careful observation across generations could produce intellectual power. They demonstrated that number could model parts of reality beyond the reach of the hand. This is one of the deep foundations upon which later traditions would build. The Babylonian tablet is crucial here. Without durable writing, there can be no long astronomy. A single watcher dies. His memory dies with him unless it is taught or recorded. But a tablet can hold a date, an observation, a calculation, a method, a list of intervals. Tablets can be copied. Copies can travel. Traditions can be corrected, refined, expanded. The sky returns again and again, and the archive receives it. The city became a meeting point between recurrence and record. This relationship between heaven and clay has an almost poetic force. The stars are distant, fiery, unreachable. The tablet is small, earthen, made of river mud. Yet the little tablet can contain the great sky, the motion of a planet, the timing of the moon, the dread of an eclipse, the expectation of a sign. All can be pressed into clay by a human hand. Babylonian astronomy is therefore not only a history of science, it is a history of scale. It is the human mind refusing to remain small beneath the heavens. Consider also the psychological power of prediction. To predict is to stand differently in time. Fear does not vanish, but it changes shape. When an eclipse can be anticipated, when a planet's return can be expected, when intervals become known, the future is no longer pure darkness. It is still dangerous, still divine, still uncertain, but not wholly unknowable. Prediction gives authority to those who possess it. The scholar who knows the sky holds a kind of power that soldiers cannot seize and merchants cannot weigh. In Babylon, knowledge was never innocent. A calculation could support taxation. A measurement could settle property. An omen could influence the court. A calendar could regulate ritual. An astronomical report could trouble a king. The learned person did not merely understand. He served institutions that used understanding. The temple and palace valued knowledge because knowledge helped maintain order. Numbers were beautiful, but they were also useful. The heavens were majestic, but they were also politically meaningful. The learned scribes moved inside this tension, half servants of truth, half servants of power. At sunset, when the western sky turned copper and violet over the plain, ordinary people may have watched the first stars appear without knowing the calculations preserved by specialists. A mother on a rooftop, a laborer returning from canal work, a potter closing his workshop, a merchant checking his goods, all stood under the same sky. But in the scribal rooms and temple archives, that sky had another life. It was recorded, compared, interpreted, and slowly made intelligible. This is why Babylon's mathematics of heaven still feels astonishing. It began in a world of mud brick, oil lamps, reed pens, and divine fear. Yet it reached toward concepts that remain with us. It found elegance in 60. It turned observation into tables. It treated time as something that could be divided, counted, and predicted. It joined practical necessity to cosmic imagination. The city did not merely look at the stars, it organized its life beneath them. And perhaps that is the deepest wonder. Babylon stood on clay, in heat, beside a difficult river, vulnerable to drought, invasion, disease, and political ambition. Its walls could crack, its kings could die, its fields could fail. Yet its scholars lifted their eyes and found rhythm above the uncertainty. In the vastness of night, they sensed order, and with a reed pressed into clay, they tried to hold it. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. Many tablets are broken. Many observations are lost. Many schools of thought are known only through fragments. The first mind to notice a pattern is nameless. The teacher who explained a method is gone. The student who made a mistake and learned from it is dust, but the numbers remain. The divisions of time remain. The circle remains. The old Babylonian hunger to measure heaven remains, answerless, adrift to ponder beneath every clock, every calendar, every night sky filled with stars. In Babylon, the temple was not only a house of prayer, it was a machine of civilization. To modernize, religion is often imagined as something separate from economics, government, science, labor, and law. A person prays in one place, works in another, pays taxes in another, studies in another, and appears before officials in another. But in old Babylonian life, these divisions were far less firm. The sacred world passed through everything. The temple was not a quiet corner of belief. It was a center of wealth, administration, knowledge, authority, and cosmic negotiation. The city's gods did not live in heaven alone. They lived in temples, or rather, their earthly presence was believed to dwell there. embodied through divine images, served by priests, fed with offerings, dressed in fine garments, honored by music, guarded by ritual, and surrounded by property. To enter the sacred precinct was to approach a place where the unseen order of the universe touched mud brick, incense, grain, oil, wool, gold, silver, and human labor. The temple made divinity material. This is one of the great keys to Babylonian civilization. The gods were not vague ideas floating above daily life. They owned fields. They received offerings. They had storehouses. They employed people. They were invoked in contracts. They witnessed oaths. They gave legitimacy to kings. They punished disorder. They required calendars, ceremonies, specialists, and supplies. In practical terms, a temple could function like an immense institution, one that gathered resources and redistributed them through ritual and administration. A sacred building, then, was also an economic heart. Grain might enter through temple estates. Wool might be processed by laborers connected to temple households. Animals might be prepared for sacrifice or consumption. Oil, beer, dates, textiles, metals, and precious objects moved through controlled channels. Scribes recorded offerings, rations, deliveries, landholdings, wages, loans, personnel, and obligations. The god's house was therefore filled with writing, counting, measuring, receiving, storing, and giving. The incense was real, so were the account books. Imagine the morning inside a Babylonian temple complex. The first light has not yet burned away the coolness of night. Priests move through dim spaces, careful in gesture, trained in purity, timing, and formula. Lamps flicker against plastered walls. The smell of oil and smoke lingers. Water is carried. Doors are opened. Food offerings are prepared. A statue of the god, hidden from common sight, receives service as if a royal being has awakened within the city. Outside the inner sacred spaces, others labor in less mysterious ways. Scribes sit with clay tablets. Storerooms are checked. Goods are counted. Workers wait for instructions. A messenger brings a report. A dispute over delivery must be settled. A shepherd owes animals. A field's yield must be recorded. The rhythm of ritual and the rhythm of management beat together. This was not hypocrisy. It was worldview. To the Babylonians, feeding the gods and managing resources belonged to the same order of reality. If the gods sustained the cosmos, then their earthly houses had to be sustained with precision. Ritual failure might invite danger. Administrative failure might interrupt ritual. A missing delivery of grain was not merely a bookkeeping problem. It could disturb the cycle of offerings upon which divine favor depended. The temple was also a place where time was organized. Festivals did not happen by accident. Sacred calendars required trained memory and calculation. Offerings had to be made on proper days. Processions, prayers, purifications, chants, and ceremonies belonged to sequences shaped by inherited tradition. The year was not an empty line of days. It was a sacred structure through which society moved. The temple taught the city how to inhabit time. This mattered profoundly. A city without shared time fragments. Work, worship, taxation, agricultural cycles, legal obligations, and royal ceremonies all need rhythm. The temple helped provide that rhythm. It turned the passing of days into meaning. The moon's phases, the agricultural year, divine festivals, royal acts, and public gatherings became woven together. People who might never read a tablet still felt the calendar in their bodies. Through fasting, feasting, labor, expectation, and fear. The temple also shaped political imagination. A king did not rule successfully by force alone. He needed divine approval. He needed to be seen as the chosen servant of the gods, the restorer of shrines, the provider of offerings, the builder of sacred houses, the maintainer of justice. Royal inscriptions often present the king not as an independent master of the world, but as one commanded by divine will. His legitimacy rested on the claim that he protected the cosmic order on earth. Thus, temple and palace were bound together in a tense partnership. The palace had soldiers, officials, and royal command. The temple had gods, land, memory, and sacred authority. Sometimes their interests aligned. Sometimes their powers competed quietly. But neither could ignore the other. The king needed the gods. The temples needed royal protection, patronage, and order. Between them, Babylonian civilization developed a structure in which religion and administration reinforced one another. Temples were also centers of learning. The trained specialists who copied rituals, omens, hymns, incantations, lexical lists, and scholarly traditions often worked in religious settings or in networks deeply connected to temple culture. Knowledge was not merely secular technique. It was guarded, inherited, and sanctified. To know the correct words of a ritual, the proper interpretation of an omen, the pattern of a celestial sign, or the ancient names in a learned list was to participate in a tradition believed to matter for the survival of the world. The sacred library was a defense against chaos. In such a world, ignorance could be dangerous. A ritual performed incorrectly might fail. An omen misread might mislead a king. A disease treated without the proper combination of observation, incantation, and remedy might worsen. A festival neglected might offend a god. Knowledge required discipline, and discipline required institutions. The temple helped preserve both. It is tempting to imagine ancient religion only as fear. Fear was certainly present. Fear of flood, fear of drought, fear of illness, fear of demons, fear of divine anger, fear of omens, fear of a king's downfall, fear that a hidden impurity might bring ruin into the household. But temple religion was not fear alone. It also offered order, beauty, continuity, music, fragrance, light, procession, shared identity, and the hope that the human world could remain in conversation with powers greater than itself. There was majesty in it. A procession through Babylon would have transformed the city. Streets cleaned and prepared, statues or sacred symbols carried, musicians sounding instruments, priests chanting, people watching from doorways and rooftops, children lifted for a better view, the smell of dust and bodies mingling with incense, the divine presence moving through human space, making the city more than a settlement of walls and markets. For a moment, Babylon would see itself as a cosmic stage. Yet behind that spectacle stood planning. Someone maintained the route. Someone prepared garments. Someone supplied food. Someone scheduled participants. Someone recorded expenses. Someone ensured that the correct ritual language was spoken. The grandeur depended on administration. The mystery depended on labor. The sacred depended on logistics. This is not a reduction of religion. It is the opposite. It shows how deeply religion organized reality. The gods required a civilization, and civilization required the gods. The temple's economic role could reach into private life. Individuals might dedicate offerings, make vows, borrow from temple resources, serve in temple occupations, or depend on temple redistribution. Families might invoke gods in contracts and legal oaths. A person wronged in a dispute could appeal not only to human witnesses, but to divine justice. The sacred was woven into the vocabulary of trust. Trust is never simple in a city. In a village, reputation may be held in living memory. In a great urban society, strangers meet, goods move, debts accumulate, officials intervene, families split property across generations, merchants vanish on journeys, laborers work for institutions too large to know them personally. Under such conditions, the gods become witnesses of a wider moral field. A divine oath extends accountability beyond what human eyes can see. The temple, then, was not merely a place where people asked for favor. It was a place where society imagined itself watched. This sense of being watched by divine powers shaped behavior, at least ideally. It did not prevent injustice, theft, corruption, violence, or cruelty. Ancient cities were never pure, but it gave moral weight to obligation. A broken oath was not only a legal failure, it was a spiritual danger. A false claim could invite forces beyond human punishment. A corrupt official might escape men, but not the gods. Such beliefs made the temple a center of invisible enforcement. Babylon's temples also embodied memory and architecture. Mud brick walls needed repair, but sacred places carried continuity through rebuilding. A shrine might be restored again and again, each ruler presenting his work as reverent renewal rather than innovation. The ancient world valued endurance through restoration. To rebuild a temple was not to erase the past, but to claim loyalty to it. Kings could present themselves as guardians of primordial order by repairing what time had damaged. There is profound drama in that idea. A king kneels before gods older than his dynasty. Workers lay bricks where earlier workers laid bricks centuries earlier. Scribes record the restoration. Offerings resume. The city tells itself that what was broken has been made whole, yet still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. Many rituals are known only in fragments. Many sacred spaces are damaged beyond certainty. Many gestures performed in lamplight were never written down. Many ordinary worshippers left no personal account of what they felt when they approached a shrine, prayed for a child, feared a fever, offered oil, or watched a procession pass beneath the sun. Archaeology can reveal the building. Texts can reveal the formula, but the trembling heart is harder to recover. Still, Babylon's temples tell us something essential. They reveal a civilization in which religion was not a decorative layer placed on top of real life. Religion was one of the engines by which real life moved. It gathered grain, organized labor, authorized kings, preserved knowledge, structured time, witnessed law, inspired art, comforted fear, and placed the city within a cosmos alive with intention. The temple was the point where heaven became practical, and perhaps that is why Babylon still unsettles modern assumptions. We often imagine progress as a movement away from gods toward systems. Babylon suggests a stranger possibility. The gods themselves helped create the systems. Sacred duty demanded archives. Ritual required calendars. Divine property required accounting. Oaths required legal form. Kingship required theological justification. The unseen world compelled visible order. In the soft darkness of evening, when temple lamps glowed against the walls and the city's streets slowly emptied, Babylon did not fall silent. Somewhere, priests recited. Somewhere, goods were stored. Somewhere, a scribe smoothed clay for tomorrow's accounts. Somewhere, a worried person whispered a prayer into the night, hoping that the powers who governed the stars and rivers might also notice one fragile human life. Above the city, the heavens turned. Within the temple, The god was served, and between them stood Babylon, advanced beyond expectation, because it had transformed belief into architecture, ritual into administration, and awe into one of the organizing powers of history. Beneath the gaze of the gods, Babylon traded. Its markets did not float apart from the sacred city. They beat within it like a second heart. Grain moved from field to storehouse. Wool passed from flocks to workshops. Silver changed hands in weighed pieces. Oil, dates, beer, cloth, timber, leather, reeds, copper, stone, animals, labor, houses, boats, and human bodies all entered the great current of exchange. Babylon was not merely a place where people lived. It was a place where value was measured, promised, contested, and transformed. The city's economy was startlingly sophisticated because it understood that goods alone were not enough. There had to be trust. There had to be standards. There had to be measures. There had to be records. A sack of barley could feed a household, pay a worker, settle an obligation, or become part of a loan. A piece of silver could represent wealth, debt, compensation, bride wealth, rent, or commercial opportunity. Nothing moved innocently through the city. Every exchange carried a shadow of law, memory, and social rank. In the old Babylonian world, silver was often used as a standard of value, even when payments occurred through barley or other goods. It was weighed, not minted into coins. The glittering metal did not circulate in the familiar form of stamped currency. Instead, it had to be measured carefully, cut, weighed, and trusted according to accepted standards. This made scales and weights essential tools of economic life. A dishonest weight was not a small trick. It was an attack on order. Imagine a merchant in the market quarter at mid-morning. The heat is already beginning to rise. Donkeys bray. Flies gather near baskets of produce. Men argue in the shade. Women pass with jars and woven containers. A smell of dust, oil, wool, fish, sweat, and baked bread thickens in the air. The merchant does not simply display goods and wait. He calculates. He watches faces. He remembers debts. He knows which household has lost a harvest, which official demands speed, which caravan has arrived, which boat is late, which family is desperate. Commerce is not noise alone. It is intelligence in motion. The Babylonian marketplace was tied to countryside, temple, palace, and long-distance trade. A city of this kind could not survive on its own streets. It depended on fields beyond the walls, villages along canals, herders in surrounding zones, craft specialists, boatmen, porters, lenders, scribes, and officials. The economy was a web, and every strand could tighten under pressure. A failed harvest could raise prices. A blocked canal could delay delivery. A war could interrupt trade routes. A king's demand could redirect labor. A debt could turn a free household toward servitude. A court decision could decide whether property remained with one family or passed to another. This is why the Babylonian economy produced so many written records. People needed proof because wealth moved through promises as much as through hands. A loan was a bet on the future. A rental agreement assumed continued access to land or house. A business partnership required confidence that goods would be delivered and accounts honestly settled. A wage arrangement depended on units of time, labor, and payment. Without tablets, memory alone would have cracked beneath the weight of complexity. The scribe was therefore present in the marketplace even when seated indoors. His marks made commerce durable. A merchant might advance silver to another man for a journey. The borrower would travel, acquire goods, sell them, return, divide profit, repay principal, or face dispute. Such ventures required written terms. The road was uncertain. Boats could sink. Bandits could strike. Prices could change. Partners could lie. Death could intervene. The tablet preserved the original promise against all the confusion that distance and time could create. Babylon was advanced because it had learned to trade not only objects, but obligations. An obligation is invisible. It has no body unless society gives it one. The Babylonians gave it clay, seal impressions, witnesses, oaths, and penalties. In doing so, they created a world where future action could be bound in the present. A man could receive value now in exchange for repayment later. A tenant could use land under terms fixed by agreement. A family could arrange marriage with property provisions that would matter years onward. A temple could expect delivery because an obligation had been written. This is economic time travel. Credit allows the future to enter the present. It is powerful, but dangerous. It can build prosperity or destroy a household. Old Babylonian records reveal the human edge of this system. Debt was not an abstract number glowing on a screen. It could mean hunger, dependency, forced labor, loss of land, or the surrender of family members into service. A poor harvest did not only empty granaries, it changed legal status, it altered dignity, it pressed private sorrow into public record. In Babylon, silver could shine like hope and cut like a blade. The city's laws and contracts show concern over interest, repayment, pledges, and default. Some loans were commercial. Others were survival loans, taken when a household needed grain to endure the lean season. The difference mattered morally, but the tablet might still become relentless. A creditor remembered. The law remembered. The seal remembered. The debt had become real in clay. Yet this economy was not merely predatory. It also allowed flexibility, investment, movement, and specialization. Merchants could operate across distances. Artisans could supply goods beyond their own households. Landholders could lease fields. Workers could receive rations or wages. Institutions could manage large stores. Families could structure inheritance, adoption, and marriage with precision. Economic writing allowed society to become larger than face-to-face trust. The market beneath the gods was therefore both liberating and binding. It opened possibilities. It created traps. It made strangers useful to one another. It made promises enforceable. It made wealth mobile. It made poverty recordable. Consider the role of wool and textiles. In Mesopotamia, textiles were not minor domestic products. They were major goods requiring animals, shepherds, washers, spinners, weavers, dyers, organizers, and distributors. Cloth carried labor within it. A fine textile was not merely material. It was time made visible, skill made touchable. Temples and palaces could organize textile production on a large scale, while households also participated in smaller forms. Women's labor, often hidden in grand narratives of kings and wars, was essential to this economy. The sound of a city is not only hammer and wheel, it is also the quiet twist of fiber. It is the loom. It is the hand that repeats a motion until thread becomes fabric. Barley, too, was everywhere. It fed people and animals. It served as ration, tax, rent, loan, and offering. It linked the field to the stomach and the account tablet. In a world without modern banks, grain stores were financial reservoirs. To control stored barley was to control survival. This gave institutions enormous power, especially in times of scarcity. Dates and oil enriched the diet and economy. Reeds supplied baskets, mats, fences, and writing tools. Clay became brick, pottery, tablet, and seal impression. Bitumen sealed boats and structures. Imported metals and stones signaled long-distance connections beyond the plain. Babylon's marketplace was local in smell and dust, yet international in reach. Even when a buyer never left the city, goods could carry the labor of distant mountains, marshes, workshops, and trade routes into his hands. The merchant was a figure of calculation, but also courage. To move goods through the ancient world was to accept risk. Roads were not safe in the modern sense. Political boundaries shifted. Officials demanded dues. Weather delayed travel. Animals failed. Human trust failed more often. A successful merchant needed knowledge of prices, routes, persons, languages, customs, weights, and the moods of power. He needed scribes and seals, but also judgment. A tablet could prove an agreement. It could not calm a storm. The economic life of Babylon also reveals how closely freedom and dependency could stand together. A person might own property and still fall into debt. A household might prosper through trade and then collapse through illness or bad harvest. Slaves could be bought, sold, pledged, inherited, or sometimes engage in limited economic activity under particular conditions. Legal status shaped every transaction. The city's sophistication did not erase suffering. It organized it. This is important. Advanced does not mean humane. A society may calculate beautifully and still treat people as property. It may write contracts carefully and still preserve deep inequality. It may create stable markets and still allow desperation to become someone else's opportunity. Babylon's economy was impressive because it was complex, not because it was innocent. At dusk, the market would thin. Goods would be covered or carried away. Animals would be led toward courtyards. Dust would settle on empty spaces where voices had filled the day. In houses, people counted what remained. In storerooms, officials checked deliveries. In scribal rooms, tablets dried. Somewhere a creditor planned tomorrow's demand. Somewhere a debtor lay awake, hearing the city breathe through the dark. The gods watched from their temples, or so the people believed. This belief mattered in commerce. Oaths were sworn under divine names. Temples held wealth. Offerings moved through economic channels. Contracts could call upon sacred witnesses. The marketplace did not stand outside morality. It stood within a universe where cheating a man might also offend divine order. Whether fear of the gods prevented fraud is another question, answerless, adrift to ponder. But the idea itself gave commerce a cosmic seriousness. Babylon teaches that the economy of an ancient city was not a simple barter scene at the edge of civilization. It was law, risk, memory, measurement, hierarchy, faith, labor, and imagination fused together. It was the widow defending her claim, the merchant weighing silver, the weaver finishing cloth, the farmer owing rent, the scribe recording interest, the temple receiving grain, the boatman unloading cargo, the debtor watching time narrow around him. In this world, value moved through clay as surely as water moved through canals, and Babylon, advanced beyond expectation, learned that a city could become powerful not only by conquering land, but by making promises count. Inside Babylon's houses, history lowered its voice. The great city was not made only of kings, scribes, temples, merchants, and laws carved in stone. It was made of courtyards swept at dawn, lamps trimmed at dusk, children crying in shaded rooms, bread baked in ovens, water carried in jars, old people sitting near doorways, quarrels over inheritance, whispered prayers during illness, and the constant intimate labor by which human beings make a life from walls, meals, kinship, and memory. To enter an ordinary Babylonian house is to leave behind the grand illusion that civilization happens only in public. The household was one of the true engines of the ancient city. It produced children, labor, food, textiles, alliances, property, reputation, and continuity. It absorbed grief. It stored wealth. It guarded secrets. It educated the young in customs older than themselves. It negotiated marriages, settled disputes, honored ancestors, cared for the sick when care was possible, and feared the dead when fear seemed necessary. Every palace rests upon households. Every economy depends on kitchens, sleeping rooms, storerooms, courtyards, and family obligations that rarely appear in heroic tales. A Babylonian house might be built of mud brick, shaped around a central courtyard. From the street, it could appear closed and modest, its outer walls plain, protecting privacy from dust, noise, heat, and the eyes of strangers. Inside, life opened inward. The courtyard brought light and air. Rooms clustered around it for storage, work, sleeping, cooking, and family activity. Roof spaces could be used when heat made lower rooms oppressive. The house was not only shelter, it was a social instrument, controlling visibility, hierarchy, gendered space, and domestic rhythm. In the early morning, the house stirred before the full heat arrived. Someone swept dust from the courtyard. Someone kindled a fire. Someone ground grain. Someone fetched water. Someone checked a storage jar. Someone soothed a child. Someone counted what food remained. The smell of bread, smoke, clay, and human closeness gathered within the walls. Donkeys sounded in nearby streets. Vendors called. Feet passed outside. Yet within the house, the family faced its own small universe of duties. The city might be vast, but life began with the day's bread. Food was not merely consumption, it was management. Grain had to be acquired, stored, ground, cooked, rationed, and protected from pests and spoilage. A household's stability could be measured in its jars. An empty jar was a warning. A full one was comfort. In a world where harvests could fail and debt could tighten around the vulnerable, domestic storage carried emotional power. It represented not abundance in the abstract, but the ability to wake tomorrow without terror. The house also held tools of work, spindles, looms, grinding stones, vessels, baskets, lamps, seals, and tablets could belong to domestic life. Production did not always occur in separate factories or workshops as modern minds might imagine. The household itself was often a site of labor. Women's work in food preparation, textile production, child rearing, household management, and sometimes economic transactions formed a foundation without which Babylonian society could not function. Yet women in Babylon were not a single category with a single experience. Status mattered. Wealth mattered. Family position mattered. Enslavement mattered. Marriage mattered. Widowhood mattered. Some women appear in records as property holders, priestesses, business participants, creditors, debtors, buyers, sellers, or litigants. Others appear as wives, daughters, mothers, slaves, dependents, or workers whose choices were sharply limited. The legal documents do not give us inner life easily, but they reveal presence. Women were not absent from Babylon's civic and economic order. They stood within it, sometimes constrained, sometimes strategic, sometimes vulnerable, sometimes powerful within the boundaries allowed to them. Marriage was a household arrangement, but also a legal and economic act. It joined families. It involved property. It created obligations. It shaped inheritance. It could protect or endanger a woman depending on circumstances. Dowry, bride wealth, contracts, witnesses, and stipulations helped define the terms under which two people and two households became connected. Love may have existed, tender and private, but the documents speak more often in the language of structure. Marriage was not only emotion, it was continuity, alliance, reproduction, labor, status, and risk. A young woman leaving her birth household may have carried goods, expectations, fear, and hope. A young man receiving a wife entered not merely companionship, but obligation. Parents looked toward grandchildren and property lines. Siblings watched the distribution of wealth. The gods were invoked. Witnesses listened. A scribe pressed the arrangement into clay. The private life of the family became part of the city's public memory. Children were precious, but also necessary. They carried names forward. They provided labor. They cared for parents in old age, at least ideally. They inherited property and ritual responsibilities. In a world haunted by infant mortality, disease, and uncertain survival, the birth of a child was joy mixed with vulnerability. A baby's cry in a Babylonian house was both celebration and plea. The household had gained a future, but the future remained fragile. Adoption records from the old Babylonian world are especially moving. Adoption could serve many purposes. A childless couple might seek an heir. A family might formalize care. Property transmission might be secured. Labor and old age support might be arranged. The language of adoption was legal, but behind it stood fear of extinction. To die without someone to maintain one's name, property, and offerings was a deep anxiety. Adoption gave continuity a written body. In these records, family becomes visible not as a simple natural unit, but as something constructed, defended, negotiated, and sometimes invented. The household was also a place of conflict. Brothers disputed inheritance. Husbands and wives separated. Sons challenged fathers. Debts threatened property. Slaves fled or were sold. Neighbors argued over walls, water, and boundaries. Domestic peace was an ideal, not a permanent condition. The city's legal system entered the house because the house was where wealth, status, and obligation were concentrated. Inheritance could be especially dangerous. When a father died, property did not simply pass like water down a clear channel. Questions arose. Who had received gifts already? What belonged to sons? What provisions were made for daughters? What rights did a widow retain? What if a child had been adopted? What if a will or contract existed? What if family members disputed memory itself? The dead could not speak, but tablets could. So Babylon made the household legible. It wrote the family into law. This does not mean that all family life was cold or transactional. The warmth of ancient homes is harder to recover, because affection rarely needs a contract when it is intact. We see the documents most clearly when something must be fixed, transferred, contested, or defended. Archaeology gives us walls and objects. Legal texts give us disputes and obligations. Between them lies the living tenderness of meals shared, children held, jokes told, grief endured, hands washed, hair braided, and stories spoken in the evening. Still, even fragments are enough to break the silence. A small room with domestic pottery, a seal impression from a household archive, a burial beneath or near a living space, a tablet naming a daughter, a contract protecting a widow, a record of adoption, a list of goods. Each object is narrow, but together they widen into life. The streets outside these houses were likely irregular, dusty, and alive with human traffic. Walls rose close, doorways opened and closed, drains carried waste imperfectly. Animals moved through spaces shared with people. The smell of the city would have been intense: smoke from cooking fires, dung, damp clay, sweat, beer, oil, fish, grain, and refuse. Ancient urban life was not clean in the modern sense. It pressed bodies close together. Privacy was precious. Disease moved easily. Noise was constant. But there was also community, familiarity, and the comfort of known routes through crowded space. A person's identity was tied to household and neighborhood. People knew who belonged where, who owed whom, who had married into which family, who had quarreled, who had prospered, who was in trouble. Reputation functioned as a kind of social currency. A written tablet mattered, but so did what neighbors said at the gate. In a city of records, gossip still had power. Domestic religion also shaped daily life. Families made offerings, invoked protective powers, feared spirits, honored gods, and sought healing through words and substances. The great temples dominated public sacred life, but the household had its own fears and rituals. Illness in a child, a troubling dream, a death in the family, a difficult birth, or a run of misfortune could turn domestic space into a place of urgent spiritual action. The ancient home was never simply secular. A doorway might need protection, a sleeping child might need blessing, a corpse might require correct treatment, a household god might be honored, a curse might be feared. The walls of the house were physical boundaries, but also symbolic ones. They separated the family's ordered interior from the dangers of street, stranger, demon, creditor, disease, and scandal. Yet boundaries were porous. People entered, goods entered, news entered, trouble entered. The household survived by managing what crossed the threshold. Enslaved people lived within some Babylonian households, and their presence must not be softened. They worked, served, bore children, could be bought and sold, pledged for debt, inherited as property, and punished under systems that denied full freedom. They were human beings inside the intimate spaces of others, often visible in records because the law treated them as valuable property. Their lives remind us that the warmth of a household for one person could be bondage for another. This is one of the shadows beneath Babylon's brilliance. The city could record a slave sale with precision, yet the grief of the person sold may never have been written. It could protect property rights while treating human bodies as property. It could preserve a family line while breaking another. To tell the story of ordinary life honestly, the household must be seen as both shelter and hierarchy. It could nurture, but also command. It could protect, but also confine. It could remember, but also erase those without power to shape the record. In the evening, when heat loosened its grip, families may have gathered in courtyards or on roofs. The sky darkened, lamps were lit, bread was eaten, beer was shared, children leaned against adults, old stories moved through the air. Someone worried about debt, someone hoped for a marriage, someone feared an illness, someone listened for footsteps at the door. Beyond the walls, Babylon murmured with thousands of other households, each enclosed, each exposed, each carrying its own fragile world. This is the city at its deepest scale. Not walls, not laws, not markets, Not temples, but lives. The hidden lives of Babylon reveal that ancient civilization was not an abstraction. It was made by people waking, working, bargaining, nursing, grieving, cooking, praying, suing, loving, fearing, aging, and dying. Their houses have fallen. Their names are often broken. Their voices arrive through tablets written for reasons other than memory. Still, they remain. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know the lullabies sung in most rooms. We do not know the private jokes, the faces of beloved children, the last words of dying parents, the smell of a particular courtyard after rain, the touch of a grandmother's hand, the shame of a failed debtor, the relief of a widow who won her case. Archaeology reaches far, but not everywhere. Yet enough survives to make the dust human. Babylon was advanced not only because it counted stars and silver, but because it created a dense world in which households could be documented, defended, taxed, judged, and remembered. Its true greatness lay not simply in royal ambition, but in the thousands of ordinary interiors where civilization was lived one day at a time, under the same vast sky, behind mud-brick walls. The people of Babylon made breakfast, made contracts, made children, made cloth, made prayers, made mistakes, made enemies, made families, and made history without knowing that history would one day come looking for them. In Babylon, sickness was never only sickness. A fever might be heat inside the body, but also a sign of divine anger. A wound might come from a blade, but also from a world where unseen powers pressed close to human life. A cough, a swelling, a seizure, a wasting illness, a child's sudden weakness, a woman's difficult labor, a man's troubled dreams. All could be understood through a wide field of causes, some visible, some hidden, some earthly, some cosmic. The Babylonian healer entered this field carefully. He did not stand in a clean white room beneath bright lamps. He worked in a world of courtyards, beds of woven material, oil, herbs, wool, clay vessels, smoke, blood, flies, sweat, anxious families, whispered prayers, and the heavy smell of human fear. His patient might be a child burning with fever, a laborer injured during canal work, a woman weakened by childbirth, an old man losing sight, a merchant unable to sleep, or a person convinced that a curse had fastened itself to the household like a shadow. To heal in Babylon was to listen to the body and to the universe at the same time. This is where modern judgment must slow down. It is easy to divide ancient medicine into two categories: rational observation on one side and superstition on the other. But Babylonian practice did not live inside that division. Its healers observed symptoms with care. They described appearances, bodily changes, pain, pulse-like impressions, skin conditions, discharges, breathing, posture, and the progress of disease over time. They also used incantations, ritual actions, amulets, divine appeals, and explanations involving demons, ghosts, sins, omens, and offended gods. To them, these were not contradictions. They were layers. A person was not merely flesh. A person belonged to family, gods, city, ancestors, obligations, words spoken rightly or wrongly, oaths kept or broken, rituals performed or neglected. Illness could therefore have many doors. A remedy might address the visible body. A ritual might address the invisible wound behind it. The healer's task was not only to make pain stop, it was to restore order where disorder had entered. There were different kinds of specialists. Some were associated more with practical treatments, bandages, mixtures, salves, washing, poultices, and procedures. Others worked more through incantation, exorcistic ritual, diagnosis of spiritual danger, and the removal of hostile forces. In lived practice, these worlds often touched. Medicine was a craft of substances and sentences. A plant could matter. A prayer could matter. Oil could soothe. A spoken formula could protect. The body and the word belonged together. Imagine a healer called to a house at night. A lamp trembles near the wall. The courtyard is dark. Family members wait in silence, their faces tense. The patient lies sweating, breath uneven. A child clings to an older woman. Someone has already made an offering. Someone else fears that a dead relative has been offended. The healer bends close. He looks at the eyes, the skin, the mouth. He asks when the illness began. He notes whether the patient can speak, whether pain sits in the head, chest, belly, limbs, or joints. He may prepare a mixture, speak words, bind something to the body, wash, anoint, or instruct the family in ritual care. This scene is ancient, but its emotional truth is not. A household watching illness is the same across time. Fear makes people obedient. Hope makes them generous. Desperation makes them willing to try what ordinary confidence would reject. In Babylon, as in all human societies, medicine stood at the edge of knowledge and helplessness. The diagnostic texts of Mesopotamia are among the most striking survivals of ancient scholarship. They often arrange symptoms in conditional patterns. If the patient shows this sign, then the illness means this. If the pain moves in this way, then the outcome may be this. If the body appears so, the danger may be severe. Such writing reveals a mind trained in classification, probability, and precedent. It is not modern clinical science, but it is not chaos. It is systematic attention. The very act of diagnosis is profound. It says that suffering can be read. It says that the body, like the sky, like the liver of a sacrificial animal, like a legal dispute, contains signs. Some signs are obvious. Others require training. The expert is the one who knows how to interpret what others only fear. This made the healer powerful, but also vulnerable. If a patient died, blame could fall heavily. Families might accuse. The gods might be thought displeased. A healer's reputation depended on outcomes that no human being could fully control. The ancient city knew this danger and wrote laws concerning medical practice, fees, responsibility, and punishment. The skilled hand could earn payment, but a failed operation, especially on a person of high status, might bring severe consequences. Babylon respected expertise, but it also feared the damage expertise could cause. The body was a social body, a noble body, a common body, and an enslaved body did not carry the same legal value. Payment and penalty could differ according to status. This is deeply uncomfortable, but essential to understand. Medicine in Babylon did not exist in a pure humanitarian space. It existed within hierarchy. A healer might treat pain wherever it appeared, but law and compensation measured persons unequally. Even suffering was organized by rank. Still, illness could humble all ranks. Fever entered rich houses. Childbirth endangered elite women and poor women alike. Injury could strike a worker or a soldier. Blindness, infection, stomach disease, skin disease, and mental anguish crossed boundaries, even when treatment and consequences differed. The body reminded Babylon that beneath law, wealth, and status, all human beings remained fragile animals, warmed by breath and always close to death. Babylonian remedies drew from the material world: plants, minerals, animal products, oils, beer, milk, fats, resins, and other substances could be combined in ways prescribed by tradition. Some ingredients may have had genuine pharmacological effect. Others likely worked symbolically, ritually, or not at all. But the healer's mixtures were never random from within his culture. They belonged to inherited recipes, observed outcomes, analogies, and sacred associations. The world was a pharmacy because the world was meaningful. Words also healed. Incantations were not decorative language. They were actions, spoken correctly, under proper conditions, with the right objects and gestures. Words could confront invisible harm. They could command, plead, purify, identify, expel, or protect. To a Babylonian, language had force. A curse could injure, an oath could bind, a blessing could guard, a ritual phrase could help reorder reality. Modern people still know something of this, though we often pretend not to. A diagnosis changes fear. A promise calms. A name gives shape to dread. A prayer comforts even when the body worsens. A doctor's words can wound or heal before any medicine touches the tongue. Babylon understood that healing was not chemical alone. It was narrative. The patient and family needed to know what had happened, why it had happened, and what could be done. The healer provided not only treatment, but interpretation. Omens deepened this world of interpretation. An unusual birth, an eclipse, a strange animal behavior, a dream, or a pattern seen in a sacrificed organ might be taken as a warning. The universe was full of signals, but signals had to be classified. Babylonian scholars compiled vast omen traditions, building libraries of possibility. If this occurs, then that may follow. If the sign appears in this place, danger may concern the king. If it appears in another form, it may concern the land. This was not mere curiosity. It was risk management in a sacred cosmos. For rulers, omen interpretation could become a matter of state security. A bad celestial sign might call for ritual countermeasures. A dream might trouble a court. A diviner's report could influence action. Knowledge of signs became political because the king's body and the kingdom's fate were linked in imagination. If the heavens warned of danger, the palace needed specialists who knew how to respond. Here again, Babylon's advanced character appears in unexpected form. It created experts in uncertainty. It trained people to classify the unknown, preserve cases, compare signs, and apply inherited models to new fear. Whether the models were true by modern standards is not the only point. The point is that Babylon built institutions around uncertainty itself. That is a mark of complex civilization. No society can remove uncertainty. It can only create ways to endure it. Medicine, omen reading, ritual, law, mathematics, and administration all belong to this same effort. Each tries to limit chaos by giving it form. A disease becomes a diagnosis. A celestial event becomes an omen. A dispute becomes a case. A field becomes a measured area. A debt becomes a tablet. A year becomes a calendar. Babylon's genius was not the elimination of fear, but the organization of fear. And fear was everywhere. Fear of the wrong sign in the sky. Fear of a child not waking. Fear of pain that would not leave. Fear of a demon in the dark corner of the room. Fear of a ghost unsatisfied. Fear of a god offended without one knowing how. Fear of a physician's knife. Fear of debt caused by illness. Fear of death arriving before the family was secure. In the quiet hours before dawn, Babylonian houses must often have held such fear. A sick person murmuring, a family member wiping sweat, a healer preparing a mixture, a priestly specialist reciting, a lamp smoking. Outside, the city resting in darkness. Above, the stars moving with terrible calm, indifferent or watchful, depending on the mind that looked up. Still, there was courage here, the courage to observe, the courage to write symptoms down, the courage to build traditions of care, the courage to enter a sick room when others were afraid, the courage to believe that disorder could be answered. Babylonian medicine did not save everyone. It could not. Many died young. Many suffered without effective remedy. Many explanations were mistaken. Many rituals failed. Many treatments may have harmed as much as helped. Still, the effort matters. The tablets preserve not ignorance alone, but human beings struggling against pain with every tool their world gave them. Plant, oil, water, word, number, omen, God, memory, and hand. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know how many recovered because of care, how many recovered by chance, how many died despite all treatment, how many healers doubted in private, how many families blamed themselves, how many patients found comfort in ritual even when the body could not be restored. The ancient sick room has no complete archive. Only fragments remain. Yet those fragments show a city more intellectually alive than simple stereotypes allow. Babylon did not face illness passively. It studied suffering. It classified symptoms. It preserved remedies. It feared hidden causes. It sought signs. It asked the body to speak and demanded that experts listen. In Babylon, medicine was a doorway into the deepest human truth. We are bodies. We are meanings. We are afraid. And when pain comes, every civilization, no matter how advanced, finds itself beside the bed in the dark, whispering into the unknown, hoping that knowledge, ritual, and compassion will be enough. Babylon's brilliance stood on wet ground. That was its strength. That was its danger. The city rose because water could be controlled, or at least controlled enough for a season, a harvest, a royal boast, a storehouse, a wall, a generation. But beneath every tablet, every contract, every shrine, every court judgment, every market bargain, there remained the old vulnerability of the plain. The land could feed thousands, but it did not do so gently. It asked for labor without end. It demanded repair. It punished neglect. It remembered mistakes in salt, silt, hunger, and political unrest. In southern Mesopotamia, civilization was never a finished achievement. It was a negotiation renewed every year. The Euphrates could not be trusted like a tame animal. Its waters shifted through channels, rose and fell according to distant conditions, deposited silt, damaged banks, nourished some zones while leaving others thirsty. Canals extended human command across the landscape, but each canal also created fresh obligations. A canal had to be dug, cleared, watched, repaired, allocated, defended, and integrated into fields already tied to families, temples, palace interests, and local communities. Water brought fertility, but water also multiplied administration. If too little came, crops failed. If too much came, embankments broke. If water stood badly in fields, soil suffered. If canals clogged, labor had to be mobilized. If laborers were exhausted, rebellious, absent, or redirected by war, the system weakened. The city depended on a delicate chain of success. This is the quiet terror behind Babylon's sophistication. Its advancement was real, but it required constant defense against the physical world. Mud brick architecture needed upkeep. Irrigation networks needed maintenance. Fields needed careful watering and drainage. Storehouses needed protection. Animals needed fodder. People needed predictable rations. Officials needed accurate information. The king needed to appear capable of holding the system together. A ruler could claim to be chosen by the gods, but if canals failed, divine favor might begin to look uncertain. Water management was therefore political theater as well as agricultural necessity. Royal inscriptions across Mesopotamian history often speak proudly of canals opened, channels restored, lands watered, and abundance returned. These were not minor engineering notices. They were claims of legitimacy. To restore water was to restore order. To feed the land was to prove kingship. A dry field could become an accusation against the throne. Imagine a canal bank under the hammering sun. The clay is cracked where water has retreated. Men stand with baskets, hose, and mud on their legs. Their shoulders ache. The air smells of sweat, stagnant pools, cut reeds, and hot earth. An overseer presses the work forward because delay is dangerous. Silt must be removed before the flow weakens further. A breach must be closed before the water escapes. A field owner waits anxiously, calculating not in abstract figures, but in meals, debt, seed, rent, and survival. This is not the romantic image of ancient grandeur. This is the labor that made grandeur possible. Babylon's vulnerability also lay in the soil itself. Irrigation in hot, dry landscapes can bring dissolved salts upward. Water enters the field, evaporates beneath the sun, and leaves minerals behind. Over time, if drainage is poor, the soil can become less productive. Some crops tolerate salt better than others, and barley was more resilient than wheat. But no field is infinitely patient. The land that once seemed conquered can slowly turn hostile. This is one of history's most sobering lessons. A society can become advanced enough to reshape a landscape, yet not advanced enough to escape the consequences of reshaping it. The Babylonians were not ignorant of field quality. They observed yields. They measured land. They understood practical differences between fertile and troubled zones. But awareness does not always give freedom. Population, taxation, institutional demand, military pressure, royal ambition, and the need for food can force continued use of stressed land. Civilizations often know danger before they can avoid it. The canal system created dependence. Dependence created pressure. Pressure created vulnerability. In a simpler rain-fed landscape, a household might suffer from drought. But the system of water delivery would not require the same level of centralized coordination. In Babylon's world, a breakdown in irrigation could ripple through society. Farmers could not pay rent. Tenants could fall into debt. Temples might receive less grain. Labor obligations might become harsher. Prices might rise. Merchants might profit from shortage. Courts might fill with disputes. Families might sell property, pledge children, or enter servitude. Hunger is never only biological. It becomes legal, economic, and moral. A dry year could leave marks in tablets, not as a poem of suffering, perhaps, but as loans, defaults, transfers, reduced payments, emergency arrangements, and lawsuits. The archive does not always weep openly. Sometimes it mourns in numbers. Floods brought another kind of danger. Too much water could destroy fields, undermine walls, damage houses, spread disease, and erase boundaries. A farmer whose land was flooded might accuse another of negligence. A broken dike could become a legal matter. The same irrigation network that made abundance possible also created responsibility. If your failure to maintain a water barrier damaged another man's crop, you might owe compensation. Here environmental risk entered law, and law entered mud. The Babylonians understood that negligence could be catastrophic. Their legal imagination included the environment because the environment was not outside society. A badly kept dike was not merely a technical problem. It was a social offense. One person's laziness or incapacity could ruin another's harvest. The ancient city knew what modern cities still know. That infrastructure is shared fate. The fragility of water also shaped social hierarchy. Those with power could command labor, secure access, influence officials, and survive bad seasons through stored wealth. The poor met disaster more directly. A family with no reserve could be broken by one failed crop, one illness, one debt, one damaged field. Environmental stress does not fall equally. It reveals the skeleton of inequality. Babylon's advanced systems could soften some shocks, but they could also sharpen them. Storehouses might prevent famine, but whoever controlled storage controlled life. Loans might save a household in crisis, but interest could bind that household into long dependence. Law might resolve disputes, but legal advantage often favored those with status, witnesses, seals, and social force. The machinery of civilization could protect, and it could press down. This double nature is essential. The same city that organized water also organized vulnerability. The same records that preserved rights also preserved debts. The same institutions that distributed grain also demanded repayment. The same royal power that repaired canals could conscript labor to do it. Babylon's environment made cooperation necessary. But cooperation under hierarchy is never innocent. The canal did not dig itself. The levee did not rise by communal goodwill alone. Authority gathered bodies and directed them. Some obeyed because the work mattered. Some obeyed because refusal was dangerous. In the heat, beneath the overseer's eye, the difference between public duty and forced labor could become painfully thin, yet the achievement remains immense. To sustain a city in such a landscape required observation, planning, memory, surveying, scheduling, and shared expectation. The Babylonians inherited and refined traditions of hydraulic life that reached far behind them into the older cities of Mesopotamia. They understood that the plain could become fertile only through collective intelligence. The green fields around Babylon were not natural abundance untouched by human hands. They were engineered hope. From a distance, the irrigated land may have looked peaceful, canals shining under the sun, date palms lifting their crowns, barley fields moving in the wind, birds gathering near water, people working between ordered lines of cultivation. But beneath that beauty lay tension. Every growing plant depended on timing. Every watered field depended on maintenance. Every harvest depended on weather, labor, animals, tools, and decisions made far from the furrow. The landscape was beautiful because it was controlled, and frightening because control was never complete. The gods entered this uncertainty naturally. When the river rose, when disease came with stagnant water, when drought hardened the earth, when pests damaged crops, when storms broke expectations, people did not experience nature as a mute mechanism. They experienced it as a world filled with intention, anger, favor, warning, and mystery. Ritual did not replace labor, but it surrounded labor with meaning. A canal could be cleared with tools, and still prayers could be offered. An embankment could be built with baskets of earth, and still divine protection could be sought. The practical and the sacred again moved together. A field was measured, but also blessed. A flood was physical, but also ominous. A drought was environmental, but also moral. A harvest was labor's product, but also divine gift. This worldview did not make the Babylonians less intelligent. It shows that their intelligence operated in a universe where causation was layered. The modern mind often seeks one cause, one mechanism, one explanation. Babylon often saw many. A canal failed because silt blocked it, because labor was insufficient, because an official neglected duty, because a god was displeased, because a bad sign had been ignored. To us, some causes seem material and others symbolic. To them, the world held them together. Still, material limits remained. No ritual could permanently halt salinization. No royal title could make water flow where channels failed. No legal formula could resurrect a ruined harvest. No omen scholar could fully remove the danger of ecological exhaustion. This is the warning hidden inside Babylon's greatness. Human beings can build magnificent systems, but systems live inside the Earth's patience. When that patience thins, complexity may become a trap. A village can scatter. A city must feed itself. A city must maintain its workers, officials, soldiers, priests, artisans, dependents, and poor. Its appetite is large. Its failure is loud. Babylon did not collapse in a single environmental catastrophe in this age. The story is more complicated, more political, more gradual, more tangled. But vulnerability was always present. Environmental pressure did not need to destroy the city outright to shape its history. It could intensify competition, deepen debt, encourage conquest, weaken loyalty, increase administrative burdens, and make royal promises harder to keep. Civilization often bends before it breaks. Sometimes it does not break at all. Sometimes it transforms, hardens, centralizes, expands, or passes stress downward onto those least able to resist. In the quiet of evening, after the heat withdrew, the canals carried the day's remaining light. The water moved through channels cut by human command, yet never fully owned by it. A farmer might stand on the bank and look across his field, seeing green shoots and worrying about salt. An official might inspect a repair and worry about labor quotas. A debtor might stare at the same water and calculate whether the harvest would be enough. A priest might see divine favor in the flow. A king might see proof of his justice. All were partly right. That is the strange depth of Babylon. It was not advanced because it solved vulnerability. It was advanced because it built an entire civilization around managing vulnerability, recording it, ritualizing it, legislating it, and turning it into power. The city's intelligence rose from danger. Its systems grew because the land would not permit laziness. Its order became impressive because disorder was always near. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. The precise experiences of drought, local crop failure, canal politics, soil exhaustion, and household hunger remain scattered through fragments. The landscape has changed. The river has wandered. Ancient fields lie difficult to reconstruct. Tablets speak in contracts and obligations more often than in cries of pain. Archaeology gives patterns, but rarely a full season of fear. Yet the lesson endures. Babylon was a city built against uncertainty. Every canal was a promise. Every field was a wager. Every harvest was a reprieve. Every storehouse was a defense against tomorrow. And beneath the splendor of law, mathematics, markets, medicine, and sacred ritual lay the older truth of river mud beneath human feet. The city was brilliant, but it was not free from the earth. None of us are. Babylon's waterworks whisper across the centuries that civilization is never something we possess forever. It is something we maintain, carefully, anxiously, together, until the river changes, the soil answers, and history asks whether our systems are wiser than our hunger. Around Babylon, the world was never still. Beyond the city's walls and canals lay a political landscape crowded with rivals, allies, vassals, enemies, traitors, messengers, migrating groups, ambitious kings, and old cities that remembered their own greatness. Babylon did not rise in an empty plain. It rose among powers, each watching the other, each measuring weakness, each invoking gods, each gathering grain, soldiers, tribute, and legitimacy. This was a world of sharpened horizons. To live in Babylon was to know that danger could arrive by road, by river, through diplomacy, through marriage alliance, through rebellion, through the treachery of a former ally, or through the slow pressure of another kingdom growing stronger year by year. The city's markets and temples depended on connection, but connection exposed it. Goods traveled, news traveled, armies traveled. Fear traveled faster than all of them. The ancient Near East of the 18th century BC was not a simple map of one empire ruling all. It was a shifting arena. Cities and kingdoms rose, negotiated, fought, submitted, revolted, and vanished from dominance. Names like Larsa, Eshnunna, Mari, Assyria, Yamkad, and Elam belonged to a world in which Babylon was only one player, though an increasingly formidable one. Every city had its gods, its lineages, its archives, its pride, and its claims upon the future. In such a world, politics was a game of patience and violence. A king could not merely be brave. He had to wait. He had to read weakness in others. He had to understand harvests, roads, fortresses, river crossings, loyalty, and timing. He had to know when to promise friendship and when to send soldiers. He had to turn defeat into delay, delay into opportunity, and opportunity into conquest. The sword mattered, but so did the tablet. War began long before the first shield was lifted. Diplomacy moved through clay. Letters traveled between courts, carried by messengers whose journeys could decide the fate of cities. A royal letter might offer alliance, complain of betrayal, demand troops, discuss marriage, request intelligence, arrange trade, or conceal fear beneath formal language. The ancient diplomatic world was intensely personal. Kings called one another brother, father, son, or servant, depending on status and strategy. Such words could be affectionate, insulting, calculated, or dangerous. A king's letter was never only inkless writing on clay. It was a performance of rank. A ruler who called another brother implied equality. A ruler who accepted the language of sonship admitted subordination. A ruler who demanded tribute spoke as master. Every phrase mattered. Every gift carried meaning. Every delayed reply could provoke suspicion. Babylon's growing power depended on this world of messages and watchers. Envoys stood in foreign courts, listening carefully. Merchants brought rumors along with goods. Soldiers returning from campaigns carried news of roads, wells, walls, and morale. Defectors spoke. Prisoners spoke under pressure. Officials reported grain levels, troop movements, and city loyalties. Knowledge became a weapon before bronze struck flesh. Imagine a messenger approaching Babylon after days of travel. His clothes are stiff with dust. His feet ache. His donkey is tired. The clay letter he carries is sealed, protected, and dangerous. At the gate, Officials question him. Inside the city, the message moves toward men who understand that words from another king may mean war, opportunity, insult, or deception. Somewhere in the palace, the seal is examined, the tablet is opened, the message is read aloud. A city can change because of a few lines of clay. The armies of this age were not the vast mechanized forces of the modern world, but they were serious instruments of state power. Soldiers required food, equipment, command, roads, water, and reward. Campaigning depended on season and supply. Fields could not be ignored. A king who took too many men away at the wrong time might damage his own harvest. An army marching through hostile land needed provisions. A siege demanded patience, labor, and morale. Walls mattered. Gates mattered. Canals and rivers shaped movement. War was logistics wearing bronze. A spear was only useful if the man carrying it had eaten. A chariot or cart was only useful if animals survived the march. A siege was only possible if the besiegers could remain longer than the defenders could endure. A campaign was only victorious if the conquered territory could be held, taxed, and folded into administration. This is why Babylon's administrative intelligence mattered so deeply. The same society that counted grain and labor could support military ambition. The same scribes who recorded contracts could record rations, equipment, personnel, and tribute. The same canals that fed the city could also sustain the surplus needed for campaigns. Power abroad grew from order at home, yet expansion brought new dangers. A city that conquers becomes responsible for more land, more people, more enemies, more roads, more fortresses, more resentment, and more administration. Victory stretches the state. A conquered city may submit today and rebel tomorrow. Local elites may bend in public and scheme in private. Tribute may flow for a season, then stop when the central power weakens. Every new possession is also a new vulnerability. Babylon's rise under Hammurabi was therefore not simply a march of triumph. It was a sequence of calculated survival in a dangerous world. He inherited a kingdom that had to navigate stronger neighbors, then gradually turned Babylon into the center of a wider realm. This transformation required military force, but also the absorption of older urban traditions. Conquered cities were not empty prizes. They were ancient communities with their own gods, scribal habits, legal customs, and memories. To rule them, Babylon had to dominate without destroying everything that made them useful. The ancient conqueror faced a paradox. If he crushed a city completely, he gained ruins. If he spared it too freely, he risked rebellion. If he honored its gods, he gained legitimacy. If he insulted its gods, he invited hatred and perhaps divine fear. If he kept local officials, he preserved knowledge but trusted potential rivals. If he replaced them, he disrupted administration. To conquer intelligently was to balance terror and continuity. Babylon's political world darkened not because it lacked order, but because order itself attracted conflict. A city with wealth becomes a target. A city with sacred prestige becomes a prize. A city with strong walls becomes a challenge. A city with scribes and storehouses becomes worth taking. Advancement does not always protect a civilization. Sometimes it advertises it to predators. In the palace, maps in the modern sense may not have hung on walls, but political geography lived in minds and records. Men knew the routes toward rival cities. They knew river crossings, desert margins, pasture zones, marshlands, and fortified places. They knew which ruler had recently died, which son was disputed, which governor was unpopular, which harvest had failed, Which ally could be bought? Which enemy was overextended? The battlefield began in information. Even divine signs entered strategy. A king did not move in a universe stripped of gods, omens, rituals, dreams, sacrifices, and temple consultations could accompany political decisions. A campaign might be framed as divinely approved. Victory confirmed favor. Defeat demanded explanation. The gods were not distant from war. They marched in the imagination of soldiers and kings, granting courage, judgment, terror, or ruin. Before battle, a soldier may have felt more than fear of enemy weapons. He may have feared bad omens, angry gods, thirst, disease, abandonment, and the shame of failure. He may have worried about fields left behind, debts unpaid, family members waiting, or a wife who would hear nothing if he died far from home. Ancient war is often told through kings, but it was endured by bodies. The ordinary soldier stood where politics became flesh. His feet blistered on hard roads. His stomach tightened with hunger. His hands gripped a weapon. His eyes searched the dust ahead. His life could be spent in a decision made by men he would never speak to. Babylon's armies and enemies alike were composed of such men. Some were professionals. Some were levied. Some served under obligations tied to land or status. Some may have seen war as duty, opportunity, terror, or all three together. The records often reduce them to numbers, rations, units, and commands. Yet every number once breathed. Siege warfare was especially brutal. A city behind walls could appear strong, but walls also trapped hunger inside. Attackers might cut routes, destroy fields, block water, build siege works, or wait. Defenders counted food. Families listened to rumors. Officials tried to maintain order. Priests prayed. Soldiers watched the gates. The smell within a besieged city could become foul with fear, waste, illness, and smoke. Time became a weapon. To take a city was to break more than walls. It broke confidence. It broke routine. It broke the belief that local gods and rulers had protected the people. Yet cities often survived conquest in altered form. Temples were restored. Officials returned under new masters. Tablets continued. Markets reopened. Families repaired houses. Life resumed, because human beings must eat even under humiliation. The ancient world was full of such recoveries, where devastation and continuity lived strangely together. Babylon itself understood both threat and opportunity. Its walls were not merely defensive architecture. They were psychological statements. A wall tells the outside world that the city expects danger and has prepared. A gate controls movement, trade, taxation, ceremony, and military access. Towers allow watchers to turn distance into warning. Fortification is fear made architectural. The city's enemies would have seen not only mud brick and height, but wealth enclosed. Behind those walls lay grain, gods, archives, craftsmen, women, children, silver, textiles, legal records, and royal authority. To attack Babylon was to challenge a world. To defend it was to defend more than buildings. It was to defend continuity, status, divine favor, and the carefully organized life that had taken generations to create. But no wall removes politics. Danger could enter by alliance, marriage, hostage, promise, bribery, or internal faction. The enemy at the gate is dramatic. The enemy in the council is often more dangerous. Ancient kings constantly faced the problem of loyalty. Governors, commanders, tributary rulers, relatives, and allies all had their own ambitions. A city could be strong from outside and hollow within if trust failed. So courts watched people as carefully as borders. Gifts were exchanged to bind loyalty. Oaths were sworn to make betrayal spiritually dangerous. Hostages might be taken to secure obedience. Marriages could tie dynasties together. Though blood did not always restrain ambition, rewards encouraged service. Punishments warned the doubtful. Political order was not a natural state. It was cultivated like a field, irrigated with favors and fear. In this world, Babylon's advancement appears not only in mathematics, law, and trade, but in its capacity to operate as a strategic mind. It observed, it recorded, it negotiated, it punished, it absorbed, it displayed. It survived among competitors by learning that a city must think beyond its walls while never forgetting the fields beneath its feet. And still, uncertainty remained. A message might lie, an ally might delay, a general might fail, a son might rebel, a conquered city might rise when the king was far away, a god might seem to withdraw favor, a storm might ruin the road, a disease might move through the army. An empire could be conceived in ambition and undone by mud. This is why the gates of Babylon carry such power in the imagination. They stand at the meeting point of inside and outside, order and threat, wealth and hunger, ceremony and invasion. Through them came merchants with goods, envoys with messages, farmers with produce, soldiers with prisoners, refugees with terror, and royal processions heavy with symbolism. Every gate was an opening in the city's confidence. At night, guards may have stood listening beyond the walls. The plain was dark. Fires glowed in the distance. Dogs barked. Somewhere along the road, a traveler moved beneath the stars. Somewhere farther away, another king held council, weighed silver, counted troops, invoked his god, and imagined Babylon as prize, ally, rival, or obstacle. No ancient city lived alone. Babylon's greatness was forged not in isolation, but in pressure. Its systems became sharper because others threatened it. Its kings became more ambitious because rivals existed. Its laws and administration mattered because conquest created more people to govern. Its temples gained wider significance because political power sought sacred endorsement. Its walls rose in a world where envy had roads. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. The private fears of rulers are lost. The whispered intelligence in palace corridors is gone. The doubts of soldiers before battle rarely survive. The anger of conquered families lies beneath formal records. We see campaigns, treaties, letters, victories, and submissions, but not the full human trembling underneath them. Yet the shape of danger is clear. Empires at the gates were not sudden visitors from nowhere. They were part of the atmosphere Babylon breathed. Every city was both neighbor and potential enemy. Every alliance was a bridge that might become a trap. Every victory created new frontiers. Every frontier created new fear. Babylon was advanced, but advancement did not make it peaceful. It made it consequential. The city had become worth fighting for, worth fearing, worth courting, worth betraying, and worth remembering. On the plain beneath the immense Mesopotamian sky, amid rivers, roads, letters, armies, and gods, Babylon stood like a flame in dry grass, brilliant, dangerous, watched from every side. Babylon did not fall silent when power changed hands. That is the first truth to understand. Ancient collapse is often imagined as a clean ending, a final night of flames, a last scream at the gate, a king struck down, a temple emptied, and then darkness. Such moments did happen in the ancient world. Cities burned, Walls were breached. Palaces were looted. Families fled with whatever could be carried. But history is rarely so simple. More often, collapse is not an ending of life, but an ending of arrangement. The people remain. The houses remain in damaged form. The fields still demand water. The gods still require offerings. Debts still exist. Children still need bread. Babylon's story in the centuries around Hammurabi reveals this difficult truth. The city could conquer. The city could rule. The city could lose. And still, it could continue. After the great expansion of Babylonian power, the realm that had been drawn together under royal ambition faced the old problem of all empires. It was easier to win territory than to hold it across generations. Conquered cities had their own memories. Local elites did not forget former status. Distant regions watched for weakness. Royal succession could disturb loyalty. Administrative burdens grew heavier. Enemies waited beyond the edges. A king's death could loosen what his victories had tied. Empire is not a monument. It is a tension. It must be held. The rulers who inherited a powerful kingdom inherited not only glory, but strain. They had to maintain canals, defend borders, satisfy gods, collect resources, reward officials, command armies, manage old cities, and persuade the world that Babylon remained the center of order. Every task required information and obedience. Every failure created opportunity for rivals. A great kingdom could appear strong while hidden fractures widened beneath its surface. This is why the end of old Babylonian dominance should not be pictured merely as sudden destruction. It was also a process of narrowing control, shifting alliances, lost territories, pressure from neighboring powers, internal burdens, and the slow exhaustion that can follow an age of conquest. The city did not become empty because a royal dream weakened. It became a city within a changed political world. The tablets reveal continuity even when the map changes. People kept buying, selling, marrying, borrowing, litigating, adopting, inheriting, and praying. A household did not stop needing grain because a dynasty trembled. A merchant did not stop calculating risk because a border moved. A widow did not stop defending her rights because royal inscriptions grew less confident. In the deep structure of society, life pressed forward through uncertainty. This is one of the haunting features of ancient history. Grand events pass above ordinary lives like storms. Sometimes the roof collapses. Sometimes only the air changes. Imagine Babylon during a period of political unease. In the palace, officials receive troubling reports. A province delays tribute. A governor writes in careful language that hides panic. Messengers arrive with dust on their clothes. The king consults advisors. Ritual specialists search for signs. Scribes prepare orders. Soldiers are counted. Storehouses are checked. Outside the palace, bread still bakes. A potter still turns clay. A mother still scolds a child. A debtor still avoids a creditor in the street. The city lives in layers of awareness. Some know danger clearly. Some feel only rising prices. Some hear rumors. Some are too poor to think beyond the next meal. Some believe the gods will protect the city. Some quietly prepare to survive whoever wins. Power may change suddenly, but adaptation begins before conquest. Families hide valuables. Officials shift loyalties. Merchants reduce risk. Temples preserve property claims. Soldiers watch commanders. Scribes continue writing because every ruler needs records. Even conquerors need the machinery of the conquered. A city with archives, accountants, land surveys, trained personnel, and established institutions is too useful to erase completely unless rage overwhelms strategy. This is why continuity often survives defeat. A conqueror may replace the king, but he still needs grain. He still needs taxes. He still needs scribes. He still needs roads, canals, officials, storehouses, and obedience. The names at the top of documents may change, but many hands below continue their work. The reed stylus does not care which dynasty commands it. Clay receives the wedge just the same. Yet continuity should not be mistaken for peace. Political transition could be terrifying. If an army entered the city, or if authority collapsed, ordinary people faced theft, violence, forced labor, conscription, deportation, debt pressure, and uncertainty over property. A legal claim was strongest when institutions were stable. When institutions shook, the vulnerable suffered first. The powerful could negotiate. The poor endured. The end of a ruling order also wounded the imagination. In Babylon, kingship was not merely administration. It was cosmic responsibility. A king who failed had not simply mismanaged affairs. He seemed to have lost divine support, failed justice, neglected ritual, angered gods, or allowed disorder to penetrate the land. Political collapse therefore carried religious force. It demanded explanation. Why did the gods permit this? Who had sinned? Which ritual had failed? Which omen had been ignored? Was the enemy chosen as punishment? Was the city being tested? Such questions do not vanish from human history. Every civilization, when shaken, seeks meaning. Babylon's world gave that search a sacred grammar. Disaster could be read as a sign, not merely suffered as accident. The collapse of power became part of a moral and cosmic drama. Still, one must be careful. The ancient record often preserves the voices of kings and institutions more clearly than those of common grief. A royal inscription may describe victory as divine justice. A defeated city's pain may remain unrecorded. A new ruler may claim to restore order while those beneath him remember only fear. History is crowded with official language covering private wounds. Babylon's transitions ask us to listen for what is not said. A tablet recording the sale of a field after a crisis may hide desperation. A loan taken in troubled times may hide hunger. A child placed in another household may hide family collapse. A slave sold may hide a story of debt and grief. A restored temple inscription may hide the damage that made restoration necessary. Collapse speaks in fragments, often through documents that do not call themselves tragic. The city's physical fabric would have carried scars as well. Mud brick walls needed repair even in calm times. Under stress, maintenance could falter. Houses could decay. Canals could silt up. Defensive works could suffer. Sacred buildings might lose wealth or labor. Public spaces could change use. Later rebuilding might cover older damage, leaving archaeologists to ask whether a layer of ash represents attack, accident, ritual clearing, or the ordinary violence of time. Stratigraphic excavation becomes crucial in such questions. A burn layer is not automatically a conquest. A broken wall is not automatically a battle. A gap in occupation is not automatically abandonment. Archaeology must resist drama when evidence is quiet, yet it must not ignore violence when the ground reveals it. The earth is honest, but not always clear. It preserves traces, not explanations. Human interpretation must move carefully between the temptation of legend and the humility of evidence. Babylon's survival through changing regimes also challenges the idea that a city belongs only to its rulers. Dynasties rise and fall, but urban identity can be deeper than monarchy. People may continue to call themselves by a place, worship its gods, preserve its festivals, remember its streets, and rebuild its shrines long after kings have disappeared. The city becomes a vessel that outlives political forms. This is why Babylon could decline and revive more than once in its long history. It possessed gravity, sacred gravity, economic gravity, geographic gravity, intellectual gravity. A place with deep memory is difficult to erase. Even when weakened, it remains useful to ambitious powers. Even when conquered, it remains symbolically charged. Even when damaged, it can be rebuilt because people know where the canals run, where the temples stand, where the markets gather, where authority once sat. A city is not only walls, it is remembered habit. The transition from greatness to subordination is one of the most painful movements in history. A city that once commanded others must learn to receive commands. Its elites must decide whether to resist, collaborate, withdraw, or reinterpret their own status. Its priests must explain why their gods remain mighty when foreign power has prevailed. Its scribes must adapt formulas. Its merchants must adjust routes and loyalties. Its ordinary people must survive the insult of history. No trumpet announces this inward change. It happens in offices, houses, courtyards, shrines, and markets. A new seal appears on an order. A new name begins to date tablets. A tax is collected for a different master. A local official bows to a foreign envoy. A temple prayer includes a ruler no one loves. A soldier at the gate wears unfamiliar allegiance. The city continues, but the air is altered. Babylon's genius lay partly in this capacity to absorb transformation without disappearing. The city's institutions, writing culture, economic networks, sacred prestige, and location gave it resilience. But resilience is not invincibility. It is the ability to carry wounds without immediately dying. Babylon carried many. There is dignity in such endurance, but also sorrow. The people living through transition did not experience themselves as symbols of resilience. They experienced uncertainty, inconvenience, fear, opportunity, loss, ambition, compromise, and fatigue. A scribe may have cared less about the grand decline of a dynasty than about whether his position remained secure. A merchant may have cared whether roads stayed open. A mother may have cared whether soldiers entered her street. A priest may have cared whether offerings continued. A farmer may have cared whether canal labor increased. History names the age. Life feels the pressure. This is why collapse without silence is such a powerful idea. The fall of one order does not mean the disappearance of sound. It means different sounds. The shout of command in another accent, the hammering of repairs after damage, the murmuring of rumors, the scratching of stylus on clay as new terms are recorded, the crying of families who lost too much, the chanting of priests insisting that order can return, the footsteps of people walking the same streets under changed authority. Babylon teaches that decline is not always darkness. Sometimes it is adaptation. Sometimes it is humiliation. Sometimes it is survival. Sometimes it is preparation for a later brilliance no one living in the wounded moment can imagine. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know how many people wept when old loyalties failed. We do not know who welcomed a new ruler for practical advantage. We do not know which families lost everything, which officials prospered, which temples negotiated successfully, which soldiers deserted, which children grew up remembering a time of fear as normal life. The clay gives structure. The heart remains harder to excavate, yet the lesson is clear enough. Babylon was not a fragile illusion shattered by one blow. It was a living organism, capable of suffering, adjusting, preserving, and transforming. Its political arrangements could collapse while its urban memory endured. Its rulers could vanish while its scribes continued. Its walls could be damaged while its name remained powerful. Its dominance could pass, yet its influence could remain embedded in law, number, ritual, and imagination. In the ancient night, a city under changed power might look almost unchanged from afar. Lamps flicker, smoke rises, dogs bark. The river moves beyond the walls. Stars continue their slow procession overhead. A stranger approaching from the plain sees mud brick, gates, and shadow, not the invisible rearrangement of authority within. But inside, people know. They know which names are no longer spoken with confidence. They know which seals matter now. They know which debts have become dangerous. They know which prayers carry fear. They know that history has shifted beneath their feet. And still, they wake in the morning. They draw water. They open shops. They go to court. They repair walls. They copy tablets. They bury the dead. They teach children the signs. This is not silence. This is the sound of civilization continuing after certainty has failed. Babylon endured because human beings endure, not as legends, but as workers of the next necessary hour. Its ancient transitions remind us that the end of one world is often the beginning of another, lived inside the same streets, beneath the same sky, with the same need for bread, justice, memory, and hope. Babylon became larger than itself, long after particular kings had vanished into dust, long after old treaties lost their force, long after many who walked its streets were unnamed beyond recovery. The city continued to grow in memory. It did not grow with new bricks alone. It grew inside stories, warnings, royal dreams, prayers, accusations, scholarly traditions, foreign imaginations, and the fears of peoples who had never seen its walls. This is one of the strangest fates a city can suffer. To become a symbol is a kind of immortality. It is also a kind of distortion. The real Babylon was mud brick, heat, canal water, markets, courts, temples, illness, labor, debt, ambition, and domestic life. It had smells, flies, cracked walls, exhausted workers, anxious mothers, proud scribes, corrupt men, skilled women, hungry animals, patient priests, and tired guards. But the remembered Babylon became something broader and more dangerous. It became the city of splendor and arrogance, the city of exile, the city of foreign power, the city of astronomers, the city of golden images, the city of confusion, the city that human imagination could use whenever it needed a word for greatness gone wrong. This transformation did not happen in one mind or one century. Different peoples reimagined Babylon for different reasons. For conquerors, it could be a prize. To possess Babylon was to claim an inheritance of deep antiquity. A ruler who entered the city did not merely take territory. He touched a name already heavy with sacred and political force. The temples, the learned traditions, the urban prestige, the memory of earlier kings, all made Babylon valuable beyond its walls. To rule it was to stand inside a lineage of power. To damage it was to risk appearing impious or reckless. To restore it was to present oneself as chosen by destiny. Cities with sacred memory can conquer their conquerors in imagination. A foreign king may take the throne, but he must speak the city's language of legitimacy. He must honor its gods, respect its rituals, manage its elites, and place himself inside its inherited order. Otherwise, conquest remains incomplete. Babylon's genius lay partly in this ability. Even under new masters, it compelled them to answer an old question. What does it mean to rule the city of Babylon? The answer was never merely military. It was ceremonial. It was theological. It was administrative. It was symbolic. Later empires understood this. When powerful rulers sought to command Mesopotamia, Babylon's name mattered. It could not be treated as just another settlement. Its learned families, priesthoods, scribal traditions, temple networks, and monumental memories gave it a strange resilience. A ruler might govern from elsewhere, but Babylon remained a place where ancient authority gathered like incense in a closed room. The Greeks would also encounter Babylon as wonder. To Greek writers, the city appeared through layers of report, admiration, exaggeration, misunderstanding, and genuine observation. Its walls became legendary. Its temples and palaces stirred imagination. Its scholars, especially those associated with celestial knowledge, contributed to the reputation of Babylonia as a land of ancient wisdom. The Greek mind, so often presented as the fountain of rational inquiry, stood downstream from older Eastern traditions in ways both direct and indirect. Babylonian astronomy and mathematics formed part of the wider inheritance through which later scientific thought developed. Yet foreign admiration often simplifies what it praises. Babylon became a place of marvel. The marvel could obscure the labor. It was easier to speak of immense walls than of canal workers, easier to imagine towers than debt contracts, easier to praise astronomers than name the generations of scribes who preserved observations, easier to turn Babylon into wonder than to remember that wonder is built by tired hands. Religious memory transformed the city even more profoundly. In biblical tradition, Babylon became one of the great names of displacement, pride, oppression, and divine judgment. The city was remembered through the trauma of conquest and exile, through the pain of people removed from their land and forced to understand suffering beneath a foreign empire's shadow. In that memory, Babylon was not merely impressive. It was morally charged. It became the place where power stood against covenant, where splendor could not hide arrogance, where empire was weighed by a higher justice. This reimagined Babylon has lived for millennia. It entered sermons, poems, paintings, songs, political language, and apocalyptic visions. It became a warning against luxury, tyranny, corruption, spiritual confusion, and human overreach. To call something Babylon was to say that magnificence might be rotten at the core. The name became a weapon of moral imagination. And yet, this symbolic Babylon was not identical with the living city. This matters. The people who baked bread, copied tablets, repaired canals, raised children, practiced medicine, traded wool, guarded gates, and prayed for health were not symbols of wickedness. They were human beings inside an imperial structure that later peoples remembered through suffering. Every empire contains ordinary lives that do not choose the meanings later attached to them. The city became a metaphor, but its people were never metaphors to themselves. They woke hungry, they worried, they loved, they aged, they died. The reimagining of Babylon therefore carries both truth and injustice. It is true that the city became associated with domination, wealth, conquest, and sacred arrogance in the eyes of those harmed by Mesopotamian imperial power. It is also true that Babylon preserved knowledge, organized law, refined mathematics, sustained temples, and held within its walls many people whose daily concerns were no different from those of humanity anywhere. A symbol is powerful because it simplifies. History is powerful because it complicates. The archaeologist's Babylon and the remembered Babylon must be held together without forcing one to devour the other. The symbolic city tells us how later cultures processed trauma, awe, fear, and moral judgment. The excavated city tells us how people actually lived, worked, counted, prayed, governed, and endured. Between the two lies a vast field of interpretation, answerless, adrift to ponder. Babylon's later reputation also reminds us that cities continue to exist after they are physically wounded. A place may decline in stone and still expand in language. Its material body may shrink while its imaginative body grows enormous. This is why a ruin can be more influential than a living capital. The ruin is available to thought. It can be filled with warning, longing, scholarship, nationalism, theology, fantasy, and grief. In this way, Babylon became an afterlife, not a heavenly afterlife, but a cultural one. Its name traveled where its armies did not. Its mathematical inheritance moved through time in subtle forms. Its astronomical traditions influenced later observers. Its laws became part of discussions about early justice. Its towers became images of human ambition. Its exile stories shaped religious identity. Its ruins attracted explorers. Its tablets filled museums. Its broken bricks continued to speak. But every afterlife changes the dead. The Babylon of imagination was often cleaner or darker than reality. It was made either too magnificent or too monstrous. It was turned into a golden dream or a moral nightmare. The actual city was more interesting than either. It was neither pure wisdom nor pure corruption. It was a complex human achievement, one that mixed administrative genius with coercion, sacred beauty with fear, intellectual brilliance with inequality, and endurance with violence. That mixture is what makes it human. A perfect city teaches little. A ruined, brilliant, compromised city teaches everything. Consider the image of the tower. In later imagination, Babylon is often linked with the idea of a structure reaching toward heaven, an emblem of human pride, collective labor, linguistic confusion, and divine rebuke. Whether one reads such traditions as theology, memory, myth, or moral architecture, the image endures because it captures something real about cities. Cities do rise upward. They gather people beyond family and tribe. They multiply languages and tasks. They promise unity while producing conflict. They reach toward heaven with hands still dirty from earth. Babylon was that paradox in monumental form. It sought order and produced anxiety. It gathered knowledge and generated fear. It built sacred spaces and became a warning. It made laws and practiced hierarchy. It measured the heavens and could not escape the river mud. It became great enough to be hated, admired, conquered, remembered, condemned, and studied. This is the fate of cities that matter too much. The priests of later Babylon, preserving rituals and astronomical knowledge under changing regimes, may have understood something of this burden. They lived among memories larger than themselves. They served gods whose temples had seen dynasties come and go. They copied traditions old enough to make any present ruler seem temporary. Their scholarship was not merely intellectual. It was an act of continuity against humiliation. To copy an old tablet in a changing world is to say that the past has not surrendered. To perform an old ritual under a new king is to say that the gods remain. To maintain a calendar when empires shift is to say that time itself still has order. Such acts are quiet forms of resistance and survival. Babylon's reimagining was not only done by outsiders. The city's own inhabitants and scholars helped preserve its greatness by continuing its traditions, restoring its temples, and presenting its past as meaningful. Memory is never passive. It is curated, defended, edited, and renewed. Every generation chooses what to keep alive and what to let sink into silence. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know how ordinary Babylonians felt about the stories others told of them. We do not know whether a late temple scholar looked at foreign soldiers and felt contempt, fear, resignation, or opportunity. We do not know whether a market woman cared about imperial symbolism when she needed grain. We do not know how many laughed at official ceremonies, how many believed deeply, how many simply endured. The great symbolic city casts a long shadow, and in that shadow many small lives disappear. Archaeology tries to bring them back. A tablet does not completely defeat myth, but it interrupts it. It says that behind the symbol was a person. A contract says, someone trusted or feared someone else. A medical text says, someone tried to heal. A school tablet says, someone learned with difficulty. A legal judgment says, someone demanded justice. A ration list says, someone worked. A seal impression says, someone stood behind an act and marked it as his own. These small survivals rescue Babylon from becoming only a sermon. They return dust to flesh. At twilight, imagine a later traveler standing among Babylon's remains. The air is cooling. The plain stretches wide and quiet. Broken mounds rise where monumental buildings once stood. A fragment of brick lies near the foot. The traveler has heard stories of pride, splendor, punishment, impossible walls, gardens, kings, astrologers, and doom. Yet the earth offers something quieter. It offers fragments. It refuses a single meaning. The city is both real and remembered, both excavated and imagined, both human and mythic. That is why Babylon still holds us. It is not only the ancient city itself, but the long argument over what it means. Every age creates its own Babylon. The theologian sees judgment. The archaeologist sees layers. The historian sees institutions. The mathematician sees number. The poet sees splendor and ruin. The exile sees pain. The ruler sees legitimacy. The moralist sees warning. The dreamer sees towers under a burning sky. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made. Perhaps new tablets will complicate old narratives. Perhaps buried archives will reveal unknown families, forgotten officials, lost rituals, or political events still hidden in clay. Perhaps the city will continue to resist every attempt to reduce it to one lesson. That resistance is its final dignity. Babylon was reimagined because it was too large for memory to leave alone. It became a mirror in which later civilizations saw their own fears of power, knowledge, luxury, exile, and divine judgment. But beneath the mirror remains the city itself, made of mud brick and mind, a place where human beings tried to organize the world and became, in doing so, unforgettable. Babylon still teaches because Babylon still resembles us, not in clothing, not in language, not in the shape of its houses, not in the smoke of its ovens or the sound of its carts moving along dusty streets, but in the deeper architecture of human longing. The city wanted order. It wanted memory. It wanted justice, or at least the appearance of justice strong enough to restrain chaos. It wanted the heavens to be legible, the fields to be measured, the gods to be honored, the market to be trusted, the sick to be healed, the dead to be remembered, and the future to be made less frightening through calculation. That desire has not vanished. It has changed its tools. The reed stylus has become the keyboard. The clay tablet has become the database. The temple archive has become the server room. The royal inscription has become the state announcement. The market contract has become the financial document. The watcher of stars has become the scientist with instruments and models. The canal administrator has become the engineer managing water, energy, transport, and risk. Yet the human problem remains hauntingly similar. How do we hold a complex world together? Babylon answered with clay, kingship, law, number, ritual, labor, and fear. Its answers were brilliant and incomplete. They protected some and oppressed others. They created stability and hierarchy. They preserved memory and recorded human suffering in the same hard surface. They allowed trade to flourish and debt to devour. They gave the city a sense of cosmic order while binding that order to power. This is why Babylon mustn't be admired too simply. Admiration without judgment becomes blindness. Judgment without imagination becomes arrogance. The people of Babylon were not failed moderns. They were not children at the dawn of civilization. They were intellectual and philosophical equals, facing their own world with the tools, beliefs, anxieties, and inherited knowledge available to them. They observed, they classified, they calculated, they prayed, they argued, they punished, they healed, they built, they feared, they dreamed of permanence while living inside decay. Every ruin is a lesson in humility. A city that once seemed central to the world can become mounds beneath the wind. A law that once carried royal authority can become an object behind glass. A house where children laughed can become a pattern in soil. A temple where gods were fed can become a broken foundation. A debt that once terrified a family can become a line of study for scholars. A king who commanded armies can become a name students learn, debate, and forget. Time does not merely pass over civilization. It edits civilization. It erases the soft materials first. Cloth, skin, wood, voice, song, scent, gesture, and private tenderness vanish most easily. What survives is often harder, colder, more official. Stone, clay, seals, walls, formulas, lists, and laws. So the past reaches us unevenly. We hear the powerful more loudly than the poor. We see property more clearly than affection. We read judgments more easily than mercy. We find the sale document, not the tears after the sale. Still, the fragments are enough to know that Babylon was more advanced than any simple tale of ancient ignorance allows. Enough to see a city trained by rivers, enriched by markets, disciplined by scribes, organized by law, animated by temples, and lifted toward the stars by mathematics. Enough to understand that civilization was never born in a single miracle. It was made through repetition, maintenance, argument, record-keeping, experiment, obedience, resistance, and grief. The greatest legacy of Babylon may not be a single invention. It may be the habit of systems, the belief that human life can be arranged through records, measures, institutions, calendars, contracts, procedures, and shared symbols. This habit built cities across the world. It made empires possible. It made science possible. It made bureaucracy possible. It made justice more durable, and also made domination more efficient. Babylon stands near the beginning of a long road where humanity learned to organize itself at scale, and every step on that road has carried both light and shadow. A city is never only its walls. A city is a promise repeated by many people who do not all know one another. The promise says that water will arrive, markets will open, courts will hear disputes, gods or laws will witness oaths, streets will remain passable, children will inherit names, and tomorrow will resemble today closely enough for plans to matter. When that promise holds, civilization feels natural. When it fails, People remember how fragile it always was. Babylon understood fragility. Its people felt it in the river, the soil, the debt tablet, the sickbed, the omen, the border, the courtroom, the harvest, and the grave. Their world was filled with systems because uncertainty pressed against them from every side. That is why the city feels so modern in spirit. Modern people also live inside systems built against uncertainty. We trust grids, banks, hospitals, courts, calendars, codes, supply chains, weather forecasts, archives, and screens. We too are advanced. We too are vulnerable. The past does not return to comfort us. It returns to warn and enlarge us. Babylon warns that knowledge without humility can become arrogance. Law without equality can become cruelty. Wealth without restraint can become bondage. Religion without conscience can justify power. Administration without mercy can turn people into entries. Cities without ecological wisdom can exhaust the ground beneath them. Memory controlled by the powerful can bury the lives that most need remembering. Yet Babylon also enlarges us. It shows that human intelligence is ancient. It shows that wonder does not belong only to modern laboratories and observatories. It shows that people under oil lamps could think deeply about number, duty, illness, inheritance, kingship, and heaven. It shows that civilization is not a straight staircase from darkness to light, but a vast, uneven landscape where brilliance and blindness often stand in the same room. In the end, Babylon's ruins ask for a slower kind of attention, not the attention of spectacle alone, not only towers, conquest, prophecy, and gold, but the attention that notices a tablet in the hand, a canal in the heat, a woman defending property, a student copying signs, a healer bending over a fevered child, a merchant weighing silver, a judge hearing testimony, a laborer repairing a bank before the water breaks through. That is where the ancient city becomes real. And when it becomes real, it becomes close. The distance of 4,000 years narrows. The people of Babylon cease to be decorations in a vanished world. They become companions in the long human struggle to make meaning under the sky. They did not know us, but they helped shape the world we inherited. Their numbers remain in our clocks. Their legal imagination echoes in our concern for written justice. Their archives anticipate our own hunger to store everything. Their city, broken and reimagined, still warns us that greatness is never safe from time. Night falls again over the plain. The Euphrates moves in darkness. The walls are gone, or nearly gone. The temples are dust. The king is a name. The scribes are bones. The markets are silent. Yet somewhere in a museum drawer, a small tablet waits with wedges pressed into its surface. Someone once held it while the clay was soft. Someone needed memory to survive. Someone trusted that a record could outlast denial. They were right, more right than they could ever have known. Babylon remains not because it escaped ruin. It remains because ruin failed to erase its mind. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. Many tablets sleep unread. Many lives are lost beyond recovery. Many questions remain answerless, adrift to ponder. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made, what buried archives may rise, what silent rooms may speak, what forgotten names may return from clay. But even now, enough survives to leave us humbled. The ancient city beside the river tells us that civilization is a fragile agreement between memory and hunger, power and justice, earth and imagination. It tells us that progress is never pure, that order is never effortless, and that the human desire to build something lasting is older than empire, older than many gods, older than the stories we tell about ourselves. Babylon was more advanced than we thought because it was more human than we allowed. And in that recognition, the ruined city becomes not a dead place, but a lamp held low in the dark, showing us the road behind and, perhaps, the road ahead.